Hi, I'm Stephen Weber, and you're watching The Claw's Corner because Rich Sear is a sick bastard.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Claw's Corner. Today's guest is an author, designer, curator, steampunk scientist, performer, owner of Dr. Grymm Studios, and creative director of the Curioporium. He's been on BBC America, PBS, New York Times, and HGTV Selling New York. His aliases include Dr. Grymm, Beetlejuice, The Grinch, Joliet Jake Blues, and Aliocious, and more. So please welcome the man of many, many talents. We're going to talk about all that right now. Joey Marsocci to the Claw's Corner. Joey, how are you?
I am doing well, Rich. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while, and I finally got a chance to do the grand tour of the Curioporium, and I want to start with that because I am so impressed with that. Not only the whole thing, all the creations, but how they were created, why they were created, and everything you've done. So let's start with that. The Curioporium, it's called. You're the creative director.
Yep.
When did you become a part of that?
So the Curioporium is the brainchild of Nathan Nunez, who is the owner, and he started it as a curiosity shop about 3 years ago here, or 4 years ago here in Hartford, and it had everything from like custom-made dark art and antiques, and just it was a very cool spot. Nothing like Hartford had before, and then did really well, and then the pandemic came, and like the pandemic did with many people, was almost forced to shut down the store. It was about that time, a few months before the pandemic, that I had met Nathan through a mutual friend who worked here at the shop, and we just kind of hit it off. We both kind of like the same aesthetic, we like storytelling, we like so many different things, and so we just kind of found each other. Nathan also is the owner of 2 autism clinics as well, so I was very interested in meeting him as an adult who has autism, and being able to work with somebody who understands it. So he does that during the day. He does this at night. He's been doing it for years. Hardworking guy. And I just, I didn't want to see the place close. So I came to him with this idea that I had been coming up with for a while. I have several different ideas for different attractions and such. And as a former theme park designer, I had this idea to transform it into a theatrical immersive experience. And he went for it, and we spent the pandemic together building 1,800 square feet of strange and unusual things, and then opened it to the public last July after a few setbacks due to the pandemic. And so now it's here in Hartford, and it's not like anything you would see in Hartford or Connecticut or New England in general. So it's something that's really unique and that we're both really proud of.
Should be, because as I mentioned, I had a chance to walk through it when it wasn't open, so I didn't see the actual show. But for people who don't know what this place is, if they walked in there, what can they expect?
So it's set up as 2 different things. Right now, it is a haunted shopping experience. So you'll come in here, and yes, there are things to buy that are like gifts and like unique, fun items that fit in with the decor. But within the vault that's behind me, there's 6 rooms that are all themed differently, that have antiques and curiosities and oddities and cursed items and creatures, cryptozoology, demons, poltergeists, everything. And so you're immersed in all of your senses, smell, sight, sound, as you walk through here. So it's not even, it's like if you were able to shop in the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, that's what it's like. Like, that's the feeling that we want, that you could come in here and spend hours in here and look at all the little details and things that are hidden in the bookshelves, in books and stories and things like that. And it truly is an amalgamation of both of our own storylines that we fuse together to be able to tell a story even in the shopping experience. So the shopping experience, you can come here for free, you can shop for hours, you can look around, you can videotape, you can whatever. But the show itself is very unique in that it's a 90-minute experience with your host, Aloysius Doyle, and one of the Havisham Society members, and 6 people can come here and become part of the story and learn the history of everything that we've created. And when you come through, when you're in the immersive show, everything looks, sounds, everything's different. So it's a totally different experience when you see the show. Then on top of that, we decided to do like kind of one-off shows with some characters. So Beetlejuice, Krampus, Death. We decided to do some shows like that too, because Nathan used to have performers come here. I mean, there's so many different uses for it. It's really a place to come and be creative, be in the safe space, be in this kind of small little wonderland that's just kind of shoved into the middle of Hartford. So, you know, we have authors that are coming. We have people who are like Edgar Allan Poe is going to come and do a talk. We're going to, we have the paranormal parlor show this weekend where an illusionist is doing this whole show about the sinking of the Titanic. And it's amazing the different types of people that we get to come and perform, but also just the audience, because, you know, we did a test audience, for instance, tonight, and these are guys who are magicians who have been doing this for 40 plus years, and they've been around, they've been to theme parks, and they walked in here and their jaw dropped because they did not expect what they were about to see. You know, I've got a little bit of the set behind me here of something that I created, but that just continues through every inch of this, and everything inside has a story.
Now, you and Nathan created the stories yourself. Like, for example, what you created, do you create the personal story about what you made, and then Nathan will create the story for what the things that he made, or do you work together to form one story?
We work together. I mean, I've always been a storyteller through my art. So any of the creations I've ever built, especially within the steampunk realm, fall into there has to be a story behind it, because that's what makes people connect to it. Like any great piece of artwork, I feel like if there is a reason behind the art, then people will become invested in it, whether they like it or hate it, whatever, they're invested in it. And Nathan is the same way. I mean, he did directing, theater directing and writing. And so he's a storyteller too. He also loves history. He loves learning about the occult and religion and all sorts of things. So it blended really well. So we took my story that I've been writing for years of my character of Dr. Grymm, and we took his characters of the Havishams, who's he's been writing stories about for years, and they were originally part of the first shop. And we just fused them together. They really fit in together well within their timelines. And then I took a bunch of my stories, and it all just kind of, you know, became this really nice ragu and pasta dish of imagination. So it depends on the things that are in there. You know, some of the stuff he created the story for, he designed it. A lot of that stuff was in the shop before, but now it's been repurposed into something grander. Whereas like this machine that I have behind me is a 30-foot by 19-foot tall steampunk machine that functions as a seance machine. And it has every bit of it functions, everything has a story, everything works for a reason. Sight, sound, fog, all of that. So it's really like, that was my coming up with how to blend that into this world. Like how do we, how do we take his story of this family full of love and hate, mystery, and throw my character into it? And what would my character do with those characters? Well, you know, as it turns out, he would build this giant seance machine for them for a few different purposes. but it's the first thing that people see when they come in. And so it's immediately, you are, from the moment you walk into the door, you're thrust into this, what the hell am I looking at? And I want to know more. You know, I mean, that's the plan. Every corner that you turn, you're getting something new, and it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And then it just keeps going. So that's the magic of being able to work with someone to create a story like that and fuse it together into a purposeful story that also has a lot of familiarity to it with people, like that they can connect to the story. It's not so fantastical that you're like, ah, this is ridiculous. I feel like we did a really good job of merging some realistic things with fantasy and the paranormal to tell a good story.
Now, is the story the same every time?
It is not. So there is definitely a character arc. It's very much its own Marvel universe in a way. We've created, like, I know my Dr. Grymm story has been going on for, God, 25 years maybe. So there's all sorts of like dips and turns to his story and what he's doing and things like that, and the things he's created through time. But when you're telling the story, like as the performer, which I don't think I came into this thinking, oh, I'm going to be the main character. I came into it to tell the story, and Nathan trusted me to be able to put this all together. And then I, by default, became the character because I created the character. And I think it was maybe like a week before we actually opened to the public that he had still not seen how Aloysius would come to life and tell his story, because it needs people. And so it is different. The story arc of what's going on here goes in many different places, but I, as the actor or performer, I'm not an actor, I'm a performer. I tell the story differently depending on the people who are here. So I read them and I incorporate them into making their own choices, which then change the story as we go. So I'm definitely following an arc of what I have to do in that 90 minutes. But in that 90 minutes, I can tell that story in any different way that I want to. So it's very much a Tarantino way of doing it sometimes. But it also just makes it fresh. So I'm not saying the same jokes every time. I'm not, I'm reacting to these people. And if they aren't reacting, like if they're just quiet, we have another actor here that we are performing in front of them, but we still find a way to tie them all into it so that when they leave, they feel like they are part of it. But you're never going to get the same story twice. You're never going to get the same explanation of what happens twice. So it is completely unique whenever we tell the story in that way.
I think it's good for you, because I think if you did the same show day after day, several times a day, you would become bored with it. So it keeps it fresh for you as well, and for people that have been there more than once, so they'll see a different show every time they come. I like that.
And we have had people repeat visit that have seen it different ways. I mean, our ultimate goal was to be able to tell this story from different characters' points of view that have to do with this whole universe. So eventually what the foundation of what it would be is that you could choose your own adventure, because I love those books, right? That's essentially what it is. So you could choose the vault experience, as is Aloysius is your host, and he has the Havisham Society and member that's his assistant, and he tells that story. But then you could choose, there's a darker version of the story that's not as humorous, because the first version of the story is very humorous the majority of the time. It's a nice blend of paranormal, haunting, humor, because I love that in stories. But I also wanted to be able to tell the story a bit darker with a bit more interaction. I wanted to tell the story in strictly a dark, haunted way where there is no humor, that just keeps getting more and more psychological. So eventually we would be able to tell the story of the three main characters from three different people's point of view who knew those characters. And then that allows you to experience it in a whole different way, because then you find out the truth. What was a lie? What was the truth? You ever, like, I was obsessed with remember when the movie Clue came out?
Yeah.
I loved that they did the 3 different endings. And if you saw it in the theater, like when it first came out, if you saw it in the theater, it was up to the projectionist which ending you were going to get. And I thought that was amazing, right? Because then you walk out and you talk to your friend and you're like, oh, and they're like, that's not what happened. I love that. So it's my way of incorporating that into an even bigger thing. So not only is it unusual and unique every time you come to that show, but then you're getting a whole different version of the story. And then it's up to you to figure out, well, who was telling the truth out of all of these characters? So then it leaves it, then it leaves it up to your imagination. And it allows you to, come and see the show more than once and see it a different way and experience something new. For me, revisiting, like being a fan of theme parks, going back, we were talking about this earlier. I loved the Haunted Mansion when I was a kid, and being able to go back through that ride numerous times and seeing something new every time. And then learning that there was a connection to Pirates of the Caribbean that was in the Haunted Mansion and who these characters were. Like, that was fascinating to me, that you could go on it and just see something new every time. And obviously the detail of theme park rides as we evolve has gotten to that point where it's like, you go to Galaxy's Edge or Harry Potter, go to Diagon Alley, and all of these details, you could spend hours and hours and hours looking at them. That's the goal. I want to make that for the fans. I want to make it for those people. There'll be people who come through, think it's cool, leave, and never come back. But there are people who come here specifically to keep finding more stuff in that vault. And that's who we built it for.
Now, you mentioned, and I mentioned in the intro, you're a performer and you play different characters. Aloysius is one of the characters you perform. Will you have other, does Nathan act as well, or does Nathan perform as well?
He doesn't. I don't think Nathan likes to be in the spotlight too much. Like, he likes running things behind the scene, and he likes hosting events, but he's not an actor. And him trying to wrap his head around how I was going to do this and how I was going to perform was, I'm sure, perplexing to him would be an understatement. Because he works with actors, right? I mean, when we were finally bringing on other actors to be able to perform here, our initial goal was we had a few actors who were going to play the Havisham Society member as their own character, but we were also trying to find like a way for them to take over as Aloysius. So we came up with the idea of their variants, their different timelines of Aloysius Doyle. They all have a unique thread, or they all have unique parts of that arc. But in essence, they're the same character, just from a different universe. So when I had to sit down and he's like, write the script, and I'm like, there's no script. Like, there's the story I'm telling, but to sit down and like write down all the stuff that I say, like, there's no way to do it. So we found a way to do it, and then we basically just broke it down into bullet points, which I think was easier, as he's trying to direct them one way, I'm directing them a totally different way, in that this is improv, but it's not short form improv. It's not long form improv. It's theatrical improv. So you have to know the character. You have to know how the character is going to react. And because I've been doing that my whole life with like characters like the Grinch and Beetlejuice, I just know. I just get into the headspace of Aloysius. I know how he would react, and I go with it. So then it was a matter of training the actors, and this is where we both got on board together, not to stray from it, but understanding how the character is crafted, how you craft a brand new character in a very specific way. The way that I teach it is that you've got 3 characters that you enjoy, that kind of link to the character you're creating, that may be in your favorite books or movies or whatever. And the way that I explain it, and this is where Nathan was like, oh, I get it like this. If you're going to go on a long car trip, you're going to pick 3 friends to go with you. You're going to pick the most reliable friends that you're going to be stuck in a car with for like 10 hours, right? One of them everybody has to take a turn driving, but somebody chooses the music, somebody navigates, and somebody drives. And that's how I build a character, is that I will take, you know, when I had to form Aloysius, I took 3 characters from different stories, and I took the parts of them that equated to that character. And then at any given moment, that character has to drive when they're confronted with somebody in the audience or a problem. So that's why it then becomes unique, because there are always different people here. There are always different situations, but that person then takes over the wheel and they become like, how would they react in the moment? And that's how we eventually had to start training people to play Aloysius, because it's a lot of work. 90, like we were doing 3 90-minute shows on a Saturday, back to back to back. And it was just, it's a lot, you know.
So you're not the only one that ever played Aloysius. You have other actors portray him as well.
We did for a little while, and then, you know, we had to change up what we were doing because of the pandemic. So they were definitely playing like so for instance, for Halloween, we did something a little bit different in that we took our typical story arc of how we run this place, and instead of it calling forth the spirit of Miss Havisham on this machine back here, we conjured up Beetlejuice and we pulled him from the netherworld. So Beetlejuice shows up in the mirror, has a conversation, gets the people to say his name, and then he comes bursting through the door. And it was me. So I'm playing Beetlejuice. So we had to have somebody else play Aloysius and the Havisham Society member. So we never got like a full show with one of those actors playing the variant of Aloysius, unfortunately, before we did the store. We probably will at some point, but you know, we ended up turning it into a store. So we're choosing our time wisely of when we're going to do the vault experience again, so that there's anticipation, so we can get like, we can just fill the show for a weekend and do like 7 shows and just go with it. And it will also be less exhausting to do it that way.
Good.
Yeah. So you know, I'd like to see someone else. I would love to see someone else do the variant version of Aloysius and how they do it. I think looking at the training aspect of it is not like your typical show, because it's not like, here's your script. You know, it's like, know your you know, the best way I explained it to the actors, because they were used to, here's your script, read your script. Okay, you did a great job. Here's your notes. Is that I want you know, I would tell the actor, what's your favorite movie, book, whatever. Now tell me that story. I don't care if it's out of order or whatever. Tell me that story in a way that I want to watch it. And that's what they have to do. They have to know their favorite thing and tell me about it so that I'm invested. So, and then do it as a character, you know. So it's a bit of that, but really when you're just thrown into the fire, that's all you got. I mean, I think the longest I've ever improv for was Beetlejuice for like 13 hours. Nonstop, like nonstop. And you just need to know how he would react to anything. And so that's what makes it believable, you know? And Beetlejuice is a recognizable character, but still, like, you know, because you play him, he's only in the movie for 14 minutes. So what he has to say is very limited, but if you get it, if you get that vibe, right? I mean, you fall into it. I mean, you've hosted as Beetlejuice several times. So you just, the audience just, they go into it with you, you know, they go down that road.
You learned his sarcasm, what he would say, and just, yeah, I did exactly the same thing when I hosted the movie. I was on stage, not for 13 hours, but I was on stage longer than Michael Keaton was in the movie.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, that's the thing. Like, I think if you get it, if you really get into the character, you just get it, you know. And I think that's honestly, that's one of the reasons, like before I said, I'm not an actor, I'm a performer, because I don't memorize lines. Like I physically can't memorize lines. It's horrible. My memory is shit. Can I say shit? I'm going to say shit.
Okay. You just did. You can say it again.
Okay. So
my memory is shit as well.
I swear a lot, so I'm trying to like tone it down.
The Claus Corner is uncensored.
Okay, great. Good to know. Good to know.
You know what it reminds me of? I want to stop you right there. Because
Yeah.
one of my favorite shows is Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David, the creator of Seinfeld. I think that Curb Your Enthusiasm is Seinfeld without a net because there's no censors on HBO and he can say whatever he wants. And as you know, the show, he said he writes a detailed outline and he and the actors fill in all the spaces. So there's really just a couple lines. One episode could be 3 lines. He'll hand to an actor and say, okay, me and you are going to be fighting in the kitchen about this. Let's go. And that's it. So it sounds very similar. And I love that because sometimes you can tell the genuine reaction of an actor when Larry will say something and they'll start laughing or he'll start laughing because somebody else says something. And it just makes it so much more fun. And as I said, it makes it more fun for you, but also the audience probably doesn't know what you're doing. They probably think it's scripted, but it's just, except for the people that come back on a regular basis. So I think I love that type of acting because just like you, I can't remember anything and I prefer to just make it up on the spot and whatever comes in because I took improv classes for a while too. It's the same thing. Don't think, just say the first thing comes out of your mouth and just go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the same sense, you know, I love what we do in the shadows, both the movie and the show. I think they're brilliant. And they have a lot of improv. I mean, they're following an arc and they have improv within the show. But it's that story, it's the story, but it's also just how they have made this story without getting tired. Like it's always something new, it's always something fresh, and it's always just funny, but it's also them just genuinely being humorous. And I would never, like, you and I have both done stand-up. You know, I probably did not do it for that long. I was kind of dared to do it. And so I did it for like 4 months. I went like every week and I did 4 months of stand-up, like open mic type of stuff, just to learn how to tell a better story. And that's what it became, was storytelling through trauma. I would take my stories of the bad shit that happened to me and make them funny. And that's exactly what I do here. It's just in a different context. That's exactly what playing Beetlejuice is. That's exactly what playing the Grinch is, right? They're all kind of these weirdly traumatic characters that have formed them into what we know. And it's our job as improv people to expand on that story so it's believable. That's what I feel anyway. So it's always been like with Beetlejuice, you know, it's great. The movie's wonderful. I love the animated cartoon that came out. It's got a great humor to it. But then the musical came out and it added this extra level to it. And I was like, that was really clever. Like that was like almost a better story than the film. And so I just tie it all together and just keep going with it. But, you know, the Grinch is something that's very close to my heart too, since I was a little kid, like the original animated show and the cartoon. And so just knowing I've been through something that I can relate to and then just going with it. Like, I think that's where our audience connects, because you're very humorous in what you do and you connect with people and they love your sense of humor. And I don't think you can get to that sense of humor unless you found a way to laugh at the bad shit that's happened in your life, right? And then you know, people relate to you.
Exactly. I want to get into that a little bit because you mentioned you've had some traumatic experiences as a child, and that was what made you what you are now as an adult, and that is feeding into the characters that you created. So let's talk about that. I want to go back to Joey Marsocci, the early years. Did you have a good childhood growing up?
No, it was complicated. It was definitely complicated. You know, I think with a lot of people, it's like when trauma hits your family, when grief hits people, they deal with it in different ways, right? I mean, that's what I've learned the most over the years. And some people deal with it in a healthy way. Some people don't know how to deal with it. Some people deal with it in a very horrible way. And so unfortunately, I was on the ass end of that. So a death in my family to my sister when I was 7 kind of set the dominoes in motion of my world falling apart. So, you know, lived through not only the grief of losing my sister, about my family breaking apart, losing, divorce, abuse, family members with drug habits. And I mean, it just kind of kept going. I was, I think through my life, like the things that have happened, and it's like, everybody goes through this stuff. I never say that like, oh my God, I've got it so bad. Like, it's not about that. Like, everybody experiences things in a different way. And everybody goes through a lot of shit now. It's just how they deal with it. It just became part of who I was. And, I'm not going to say that it didn't like form me into, having depression, having anxiety, PTSD, like all those lovely things that are like consolation prizes for the shit that you've gone through, that you then take into your adult life and you either deal with or you pass them on to other people in a horrible way. So I luckily was somebody who was like, I don't want to be like the shitty people in my life. I'm going to go and do the opposite of what they do. And that was really how I formed my life. Like, I could see the bad stuff going on around me. I could see the bad choices people were making. And I decided to do the opposite.
I have a lot of respect for that. I just want to stop you for a second, because I do have a lot of respect for that, because so many people, not everybody, but will play the victim. Oh, I've had a bad deck in life. I was offered a bad deck. I don't know. You know what? Just stop complaining about it and do something about it. You don't always have to be the victim. I know people, they'll say, oh, my whole family are alcoholics, that's why I'm like, no, you're grown, that you can make your own decisions. And I love the fact that you said, all of this is bad shit is happening to me. I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm going to live my life, and I'm going to change the arc of my life. So I'm just giving you a little shout out and a little kudos for that, because I know people that would take what you've been through, what you just told me right now. I don't even know the whole aspect of everything you've been through, but some people say, oh, I just never had a chance. I never had it good. But you said, no, I'm going to make my life, and I'm going to make it the way I want it to be. So this is where you are right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I know, you've been through something similar. So it's like, I think there's, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to sit here and say that like, narcotics and like things that people get addicted to, like those are very real things, and they're very hard ways to dig themselves out of it. And there are like connections to why these things happen. I think for me, I really can't pinpoint what made me decide that I had a choice. It was something that just, I think in my journaling, I think in my connection, my very close connection to my sister, who was very much like me. She was an empath. She was an artist. She was my role model. She was the one person, I mean, I loved my family, but then I saw my family's colors change. And I'm a natural fixer. Like, I don't know where, I think I got that from my dad, but I mean, I'm a natural fixer. Like, throughout life, if I can help you with your problem, I will help you with your problem over helping me with my problem. And that caused a lot. Like, I had to come to a place in life where it's like, you know what, I'm going to fix me for a while, and that's okay. Because then I can't help other people if I'm broken. So, the terminology that we grow up with, I think it fuses to us as a kid, and then we grow into it. So a lot of the people that you do see that fall on that, well, they didn't have a choice. I don't think that, I don't shame people for not knowing that they didn't have a choice, because that was the environment they grew up in. And that's the problem, right? I mean, I could sit here all day and say my mom was a bad parent for what she did. I came to terms with accepting that's what she did, but more so, I'm not going to do that to my kids. That's where it goes, right? So this is how it affected me. I don't want my kids to grow up in the same situation, so I'm going to do the opposite. And I think that's the thing that has been a common thread through everything I do, whether it's my art, my stories, my life, the books I write. It's finding that common thread to get to that place that these are the choices I made, and this is what it did. And you know, following patterns and stuff like that was always something that I did. So it was very much like I would spend hours hyper focusing on the patterns of why people do things and how it affects other people. And that's, I think, what makes me a good, I will say, a good storyteller. I'm not a good writer. I'm a good storyteller. There's definitely a difference.
Definitely is a difference, yeah.
So, but that's where it comes from. It comes from the trauma. It comes from the choices, the things going on around me and me choosing to do the things I need to do. And then realizing some of those things were harmful to me, and then deciding and figuring out how to change them. Because there's one thing to make the choice, and there's another to go down that path and realize you made a mistake. But then how do you right that mistake? And I think people get into this loop in their own brain of, I can't fix this. When there is, and it's hard. It's not that it's easy. It's the hardest fucking thing to do. But if you at least do the one thing that you need to in that moment to start going down that road, the little change turns into a bigger change, and so on and so forth. Because it's not like I've made perfect decisions through my life. My life has been filled with self-sabotage and hating myself, and, you know, having very poor self-esteem. And I still live that. Like, it could be any given day, and I fall into that mindset of, I'm not worth it. And I think when you have depression and you've gone through those things, those are very real feelings. But I don't think, you know, there are people out there that, you know, I think, you know, that have inspired me to then make those decisions where it's like, all right, that's somebody else's voice. That's somebody else who doesn't give a shit, that's fucked up, that didn't mean anything to me. I'm letting it into my head. And so those voices get turned into something else, like artistically for me, so that I can go in the other direction.
Bring up a great point, because I see a lot of people that say, musicians, authors, and actors will say they had their most creative output during their darkest times.
Yeah, because I think it's you know, it's a moment of self-reflection when you know, I'm gonna say trigger warning, because I can't talk about my trauma without talking about suicide, because it was a very real part of my life. You know, wanting to
unalive. What's the difference?
Unalive. I will say that. So unalive triggered. You know, that's a choice too. And there's so many different ways that you can go down that road and make the decision that you're going to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of artists, musicians have taken that path. And I've taken that path, but I'm still here. But I think it comes from that. It comes from such a, I've been learning, I've been trying to be more knowledgeable and understanding words. Like, that's what one of the books, the book that I'm working on, that's like my opus, that is what it's about. Like, how did we learn what words mean? How do we learn what emotions mean? And it's your connections to people, right? That's where this stuff comes from. So if you're limited by your circle of people, then you are limited by the emotions that you know exist, and therefore you can't dig yourself out of a hole quick enough sometimes. And that is, I think, the problem that hits artists. And I'll say a blanket statement of artists that covers musicians and writers, and, you know, creative people. That's the problem, is that the same thing they do to their art, I find, because I've done it, you know, you're so judgmental of your art. You either decide you're going to work on it. It's not perfect. I'm going to work on it. I'm not going to put it out there. That could be writing, that could be music, that could be art, whatever. It's your talent. You don't want to expose it. You don't want to feel exposed. You don't think it's good enough. It's a reflection of yourself, right? You don't think you're good enough. You don't think you're worthy. That's the problem. And so when you get that into your own head and you can't put it on paper or in music or on canvas, then it lives inside you, and it either burrows its way in and can't find a way out, or it goes the complete opposite way and you compose, or you create and put it out there, and it inspires other people. it's going to go one of two ways, and hopefully it goes the good way. That you're, the whole reason I do art is to inspire other people. It's not for me. It's for me to tell my story, but it's not genuinely for me. It's because it needs to be here. I have a feeling that my story through my artwork needs to be here because other people need to see it to be inspired to create more art. Like it's a circle.
Yeah,
It's a circle of life.
I love it. Well, I think what most artists need, and I'm so lucky that I do have this, is a thick skin, because you're always going to have people that like what you do, and you're always going to have people that don't like what you do. And for me, anyway, I'm speaking of me personally, I really could care less. If you like it, come along for the ride. If you don't, get out of the way. But I know there are a lot of artists that I've met, and even people I don't know, just you hear the stories. And I'll give two examples. Chris Farley is one. I saw a documentary on him, and he basically just wanted to impress his dad. He wanted to impress everybody. He just felt like he was worthless, and that's why he took drugs and drank. And his idol was John Belushi, and he just wanted to be him. He really couldn't find himself, and he wasn't happy with himself. But he was hilarious, and the things that he did and the creative output that he had was amazing.
Yes, agreed.
That's just one example. But so for yourself, I'm going to ask you, I mentioned me. Do you, over the years, have you come to the fact that, you know what, I really don't care if you like it or not. I'm just doing this because one, I like doing it. And two, I want to inspire somebody. And I know for a fact that you do inspire a lot of people. And I want to talk about your trauma through the art videos later on in the interview. We'll talk about that. But right now, are you at a point where you're happy with what you're doing and you're happy with your life?
I am, I will say this, I'm going to preface this with, I struggle with that word happy, and I'll go back to that after. I'm more content in what I create. I think as a young artist, there's always that, you want that recognition, you want that approval. I don't know who I was seeking it from. Like, I know, if I want to go back, like, therapy-wise, I would go back and say, I'm trying to get the approval of my mother, but, that didn't work out. So whatever. I honestly, I think the thing that turned me around as an artist, and I'm going to go down a movie road, or really a book mode for a second, if you don't mind. One of the books that changed my life as an artist, as a person, was What Dreams May Come. Now, I didn't know it was a book. I saw the film first, and I love Robin Williams. I always have. But the book is completely different. And if you haven't read it, I would suggest reading it or listening to it or whatever. It's fascinating what they decided to use and what they decided not to use. But long and short of it is, the book is really filled with emotion, and it's made for artists and empaths and creators. And the thing that fascinated me about the book, and I'll do this as short as possible because I think it's important. I don't know whether I did it if I talked about it in my series yet or not, but it's something that changed me as an artist. They spent a lot of money in the movie of creating that world, Summerland, where Robin Williams is, right? And it's a breathing, living painting to him. In the book, it is explained that world that they go to, which isn't necessarily heaven, it's Summerland, is a giant museum that is filled with every form of art that has ever been created and that will ever be created. This is not the film. So I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, that's like when you think about what you saw in the movie, they did create that, but to think that it was all based on art, the entire world. So what it was that he's walking through the museum with his guide, and he sees the Mona Lisa. And the Mona Lisa is so much more beautiful than he ever remembers it being on Earth. And he's like, that's the Mona Lisa, but it's not. It's like, it's perfect, for lack of a better term. He's like, why? Why does it look like that? He said, well, this is the muse. This is the inspiration for the Mona Lisa, which eventually found its way to its artist. And the artist then saw it in his mind and tried to recreate it. And he kept trying to recreate it until it would become perfect. But you can't. You can't make it as perfect as your imagination saw it. So then we have the Mona Lisa that we have now. Now, the interesting thing about this, that was the secondary underlying tone of it, is that as an artist, you either decide to keep working on that painting, song, poem, book, whatever, until it's perfect, or you decide that it needs to be here just as it is. It's good enough, and I will put it out there. And the reason for it is that the reason the art is trying to call to the artist to make is so that the artist puts it out, so someone else sees it and gets inspired to make their own art. And then it connects to another piece of art that's in that, that's the muse. That's how the muse works. And when I realized that I needed to put out art to inspire other people because I was inspired, then it didn't become about pleasing anyone, not even myself. There's been very rare times when I've looked at something I created and stepped back and said, I'm really happy about this. But I have seen things that I thought, this is impossible and I don't know how I'm going to make it. And then I finally get to see it work, and it works the way that I saw it in my head. And then I am fulfilled in a different way. It's not happy. It's just content. And it's, so I don't, you know, the word happy to me has a lot of bad ties to it. So to me, happy is fleeting, right? It's a moment. But content and fulfilling is something that's much longer. It's still not forever, but it's longer than happy. So
At least you feel something, which is good.
yeah, it's something. And I think, you know, when you're too hyped up on what are people going to think about this thing, you're not doing it for the right reason at all.
Exactly. And before I get into that, I want to talk about that book because that's one of my favorite Rob Williams movies. And the person that wrote it, I did read the book. His name is Richard Matheson, who wrote all the best Twilight Zone episodes, including the Gremlin with William Shatner on the airplane. That's just one episode he wrote. So yeah, I think he wrote the movie Duel with Dennis Weaver. Yeah. So I mean, he's done so many great things. But yeah, so if people who have not read the book, the movie is excellent, but Joe, you're right. The book had so much more to it. And just if you have a chance to read any of his works, he has tons and tons of books of short. So he wrote actually, it's funny because there's a book called He is Legend, because he wrote I Am Legend. And all these great authors, Stephen King, Joe Hill, Clive Barker, I'm just trying to think of names that I remember off the bat. They all wrote their versions of his stories, like Stephen King and Joe Hill. Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. Yeah. They wrote their version of Duel, and some motorcycle gang being terrorized by a trucker, and the motorcycle gang has a father and son that don't get along. So it's a great, so yeah, I am so glad that you mentioned that, because that is one of my favorite books of his, and I'm a huge fan of his writing. I'm trying to get his sister on the show. It's on a side note, I see his sister on Facebook, and I get in touch with her because yeah, I'd love to talk about all of his work. But yeah, you know what? Another thing I want to talk about, because I was part of a writing group for a while. And these people that when I joined, they were writing their stories. During that time, I wrote 5 stories, self-published it, did 4 book signings, came back, and they're still working on the same stories. And I kept saying, why aren't you doing, well, you know, I have to do this, I have to do that, it's not ready yet. So I was able to teach one of the classes, and my class was Perfection is the Death of Good. Just get it out there. You're never going to get it perfect. Just get it as good as you can, like you said, so people can read it, enjoy it. So I agree with you, and you can't just keep it to yourself. You can if you want to, but if you really want people to get it out there, just don't keep working on it. Eventually, you're going to have to move on, release, and go to something else.
Yeah. And I think the other important thing to that, especially, this is more of a how we are now as a species connected to everyone on the internet. And I'm not sure, I'm going to misquote, I think it was William Shakespeare said, don't read the comments, because that's the other part of it, right? I mean, anything that you create, there's going to be people who hate it because they're shitty people, or they didn't get it, and that's totally fine. But then there's people who are like, they're critics, and it's like, okay, whatever, you know, opinions are great. They're not right. They're just, they are what they are, and that's fine. But it's like we were talking about it earlier because we were talking quite a bit. But again, to quote Joel Hodgson, the right people get you, and that's all that matters. So I think, yes, putting your art out there is important because it's telling your story in whatever way, shape, or form. So
I agree with that. And I'm going to bring up one more thing on this subject because I like what you're saying. I had one person in my class say, but who do I write for? I said, what do you mean? I'm not sure which audience. I said, write for yourself and let the audience find you. And that's similar to what Joel Hodgson said, where the right audience is going to find you. There's always going to be people that are going to try to put you down. It seems like whenever you get on top, whenever you do something well, there's going to be somebody that might be jealousy. Maybe they just don't like it, but they're going to try and knock you down. Who cares? There's going to be plenty of other people that are going to pick you right back up, and they're going to like what you're doing, and just do it for the right reasons and do it for yourself first, and people will find it. And you're going to, because if you do it because you think that you're saying what other people want to see, hear, or read, I don't think that's for the right reason, because you're not going to get a genuine audience. It's not going to come from the heart, where that's what really you're passionate about. So I think that, what you're doing, you're creating characters based on the trauma from your childhood up until now. And that's inspiring people. You're not doing things, oh, well, I think that this would entertain, even though you are entertaining, but you're doing it for your own reasons, and it's helping you and it's helping them at the same time.
yeah, absolutely. I think for any artist, and any artist who has put aside their pride to put their art out, and like their fear, because that's part of it. When you get that one comment that it reached someone, and it reached them, you live in that moment, because that's why that piece was made. Even I don't care if no one else gets it. One person gets what I said, what I did, that's it. Then it did its job, and now I can go make something else. And I think we focus, our human nature is to focus on the negative. It's what we remember. Like 1,000 people could tell you, you're fucking awesome. And one person says, you know what? No, you're not. And you remember that, no, you're not. And why? Because that's what your brain tethers to. So you really have to rewire your brain to understand that one person who got it is what it was made for. It's what you did, what you were supposed to do, and now do more, and now do more. You will find your audience, even if your audience is one person. Because I tell you, whether it may not be this monster that I created, because nobody knows the backstory that, oh, there's trauma behind this monster I made. Nobody knows that shit. That's something I make to build, not to put out there.
Yeah.
But there are other things that I when I do my series, when I go and talk, or I do lectures or whatever, or even just talking to kids, like being able to like teach kids, you get that aha moment, and it's a feast, and you need to like live in that feast and let it fuel your other stuff, because the other shit doesn't matter. The negative comments don't matter. They do not matter. And there's so much access to the negative shit right now that it's almost impossible. And that's why you can't let it weigh you down. So just don't look at it. Like, just stay far away from it if you can.
Exactly. No, I agree with that. And I want to sort of elaborate on what you're saying, or add on to it, because for people who don't know, I have cerebral palsy. I was born with it, given the last rites 3 times. They said I would never walk, never talk. And I love when I'm just living my life. I'm not even thinking about, I'm not doing it to get attention. I'm just having fun doing what I like to do. And the best is when I'll get an email, somebody will come up to me, somebody will text me and say, Rich, I feel like you inspire me to do so much. I look at you and you never complain about this. You're having fun. You're doing this. That made me want to get up and live my life to the fullest. And thank you. And I've gotten that plenty of times. And that, as you mentioned, is the best feeling, because I know I'm out there affecting lives, but I'm not even really trying to. I'm just living my life the way I want to live it. And other people are looking from afar saying, wow, that's inspiring. That is definitely one of the best compliments I've ever received in all the things I've done with books, comedy, motivational talks, whatever it is. That's my favorite compliment.
I think for me, it's like understanding that, like, you know, you and I have now talked a lot more in the past few days than we have in the months we've known each other. But like, you know, I told you the story. I mean, the greatest work of art that I've made is my son's. And my older son, James, went through a few horrible traumas just in his short life here. And it's not like I'm just part of that creation. Like, he's surrounded by a system of people who care and support him. And what that has done is, you know, taken these horrible medical conditions that he deals with, and they have not stopped him one bit. And it's not just me, it's not just his mom, although we are huge influences on him. But I like to think the combination of us being good people and living for him and teaching him the right way. I mean, this kid he's who I look up to. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
It's amazing to see this kid has gone through so much in such a short amount of time. And now he's, you know, going to be graduating from college. And 6 months ago, he went through something so horrible that he almost wasn't here. And so for me, that is like, that's why that is my inspiration. Like, holy shit. I don't care what I've made or who I've talked to, but I have talked to him. Like, he gets that. He's not going to be one of those people that's like, oh, I've got this problem and I'm going to let it set me back. And he knows from a young age, like, you know, we talked about it a little bit earlier, that when I do my talk, one of the first things I talk about are obstacles, right? We all have obstacles in life. And then it's, what is your choice? Like, how do you get around it? Do you stop doing it because there's something in your way? Do you go the other way, or do you find a way around it? Right? That's your choice. And for me, it was like, oh, I'm completely colorblind, so I only see the world in black and white. He knew that from a young age. When he finally could conceptualize it, it was one of those things that we still talk about. But it was one of the things that I think, in a non-traumatic way, you can look at and say, all right, I'm not going to let this thing set me back from this thing that I love.
Exactly.
And that's it.
Well, it's good to say, look at what you accomplished being colorblind. I mean, everything you do behind you, there's so many colors, and most of the people can't see, just, you're only seeing a little bit of it right now. If you go into his museum, and I recommend that all my viewers do many times, as I mentioned, it's a different show every time, but there's so many different colors, and it's amazing. You can't see color. So tell me, and I found this very interesting, tell my viewers how you decide which colors are best for your creations.
So for me, you know, I didn't really even notice it for many years. We had a black and white TV in my house when I grew up, Rich. I'm going to date myself there. And then we had a color TV, and I honestly, I'm 99% certain it was watching The Wizard of Oz on our color TV that my sister said, you know, when she walks into Oz, isn't that amazing? And I was like, what? And she was like, look at the color. And I'm like, I don't see it. And so for some reason, it like just escaped that I had never grasped. I knew it was there. It's not like I didn't know it was there. I know it's there, but it was just like, I can't see it. So there was no difference. I think that was what it was, is that there was no difference when she opened the door, except to what my sister reacted to. So I, as an empath, use my color, like how I figure out color, to my advantage. So I don't normally tell clients, right? When clients come to me and they want me to do renders for whatever, color renders or drawings or whatever, I ask them a series of questions. And in that series of questions is, what's your favorite color? How does it make you feel? And why? What's your least favorite color? Why and how does it make you feel? And what do you want your audience to feel when they look at this? Those are the questions I ask. So if they can answer those 3 questions, then I'm all set with doing the design and with doing the color work in the design. Because to me, I've spent my life after that moment, I spent my life asking people what color meant to them. You know, we've all been around somebody who like, oh, did you see the sunset? And it's beautiful. Well, then I would ask more questions as, well, what does it make you feel like? What are the colors? Like, describe the colors. Because it's never just a straight thing, right? So to me, it's like, yes, I can work as a designer with Pantone colors, like number schemes. And somebody says, oh, I need that color, that's fine. But for me, the things that I love, that I gravitate towards, is being able to create an energy. And that energy comes from years of being around people and asking them, well, what does that color make you feel like? Because if enough people say, oh, this color makes me feel like this, then I register that color to that feeling. And I know to use that color to make that feeling happen. So even though I can't see it, I just see the world in gray. So for me, it's a matter of, it's a very not physical thing. Like when I'm together with people, like if I'm physically in the room with people and they look at a color, I can almost feel what they feel when they look at the color.
Yeah.
And so I just absorb that. Like I just love that energy, just like when my sister looked at that when she saw Oz, who coincidentally, my color design teacher at CalArts was Bob Winquist, who created that. And I didn't know that. And then he was the one who helped me figure out how to create and color professionally, meaning how to get past that. My color choice was good, but my depth and shadow was off. And he was the one who suggested putting a red gel in front of what I'm looking at to change, to see, like in a dark room, right? When you're doing film, you can see the depth and you can see the shadows better and void of all the color, right? So he was the one who taught me that. It was completely, I'm just figuring that out now, the connection to that, because I never told him that story because I was so embarrassed. But like my friend was like, he's color, like he went through and he's like, I love your color choices, but this isn't good. This doesn't work. And I was devastated because Bob Winquist looked at my work, the guy who created Oz, the Tide box, the Pepsi logo, the art design for A Clockwork Orange. He designed Main Street at Disneyland. He taught Mary Blair. Like, he changed how I processed color by saying that one thing and saying, oh, you can fix that. Like when he's heard I was colorblind, it wasn't like, oh, I'm so sorry. It was, oh, you can fix that. Just do this. And I'm like,
love that. Yeah.
What? I was like, how is that going to fix it? I can't see red. I can't see red. How's it going to fix it? He's like, just try it. It took me 2 weeks to try it. Honestly, my friend bought me John Lennon red sunglasses and said, here you go, just try it. And I looked over, I put them on one day after saying, no, I'm not gonna, just being stubborn. I'm like, nope, I'm gonna give up art altogether and just become a zookeeper. And I looked over at my art and I was like, son of a bitch, I can see it now. I see what's wrong. And I immediately took and changed everything. And I took it back to him and I'm like, how's this? And he's like, oh, that's really good. And I'm like, that was the solution. And honestly, the funny thing is that after I started doing that, which went on throughout my life, I can now do it without wearing the red. But that was one of the things that I would tell people was put on red sunglasses and wear them for like an hour and then take them off. And in that brief moment when you take them off, everything is gray.
Yeah.
Just for a moment. That's how I see. And
That
I didn't know that.
was your first realization that you were colorblind during that time watching The Wizard of Oz? Was that the time you realized, oh,
Yeah.
not everything is gray?
Yeah, I had no idea. So, I honestly, I don't know how it, I mean, I came from a family with 3 other kids. So it's like, yeah, I was the youngest. There was so much going on. It's like, I think it just escaped them that it was like, oh, I never mentioned color. I don't know. I know it's there. Like I said, I know it exists, but I don't know what it means. And it wasn't until I saw the reaction from my sister looking at that I was like, oh, color has power. Color has power was something that I realized much later in life, but in the moment I knew it meant something. It means something. It means something that's intangible to people sometimes. And that's fun for me. Because again, we don't have enough words. We don't have enough words to describe good things.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What I wanted to say was a story dealing with color is funny. Growing up back in the day before we had these smart TVs, you had to actually, with the rotor and the antenna, get the TV just right. And
yeah,
the Grinch, which you and I both played in the past, that was one of my favorite growing up. And the first 25 minutes, which is probably a 27-minute show without commercials, was my father. I know I can make this Grinch greener. I know I can make him greener. I said, Dad, can you get out of the way? I want to see the Grinch. All I can see is my father as he's trying to get the Grinch greener because he was so obsessed with, no, I know I got this. I said, the Grinch is green enough for me. No, I can make it better. But yeah, the color is very, very important. And I love what you said, because I never even thought of that. I was like, how does it make you feel? Now, since you said that, I can't look at anything without wondering, well, how does that make me feel? Like, obviously red, blood, black, maybe dark. Those are 2 easy examples, but it's very interesting. I'm so glad that instructor, and what an instructor I want to talk about some of the people you have mentored you, or you met in the past, that helped you get where you are right now and the way you think. But that's amazing that story, and he's the one that said, no, do it this way. I think he would have loved that story. He would have loved that story.
He was such a, I mean, he was just such a smart, humble, quiet person. But the things, like, in some way, he's like Silent Bob, right? He doesn't say anything, and then when he does, it's yes, brilliant.
Profound.
That was Bob Windquist. So he was like, but he was just such an eloquent speaker as well. So when he was saying what he was saying, there was no snoochie boochie in it, but it was just like, I sat down day one in college, and I sat down, and he introduces himself and who he is, and talks about color and design, and leaves out all the stuff he's done. So if you didn't know who he was already, and then he's like, so let's take the Coca-Cola symbol, and we look at that. All right. And then it's turning out that everything he's talking about was stuff he created. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what is going on right now? Like, all of these iconic things were just coming to light. And it was like, you designed that like that? And, for him to be at CalArts at that time, when Bob was there, he was just such a kind soul, because that was the thing. Like, I was bullied in high school. I was bullied throughout high school and everything before. I went through abuse. And then I got to college, and I was like, oh, I'm finally going to like a nerd place where there's no bullies. And then I found out that they had, somewhere in time, they had created a jock nerd. And they were there. And I was like, son of a bitch, like, this doesn't stop. Bullying doesn't stop, right? There's always somebody who thinks you think they're better than them. And then there's a whatever. And obviously Hollywood, I mean, this is how California. So it's like, that's the industry is about. So going into it so naive to think, oh no, I'm going to be with animators and we're going to watch Bugs Bunny and sing Kumbaya. That's not how it is. So, I learned the hard way, but Bob was the one that was like, when I was not putting my art out. Like, he knew I would not put my art out. The one time I put my art out, it got ripped to shreds, literally and figuratively. by bullies. And he stood up for me. He
Good.
was the one that I mean, there's been very few people in my life who has stood up for me, and he was one of them. And to think that this guy who is so monumental like nobody would know, nobody knows he did any of this stuff. You know, the normal person doesn't think, oh yeah, Bob Winquist, and tie that to Disneyland or to the Clockwork Orange or whatever. But once I knew that, and I was like, no, he took time out of his day to sit with me for hours and talk about color, just me and him, and about bullying, and don't let them affect you. Don't let them change who you are.
Yeah.
Like he said that to me. Do not let them change who you are.
He probably saw your passion. He probably saw your love of what you're doing, and he knew, and he probably obviously saw your talent, and he knew there was something in there. So I'm so glad. All you need is that one person to say, no, you can do it. And that's all it's going to take. And I mean, that was a big person to say that, you know, somebody who's so important in the industry, not just somebody off the street. It's like, oh yeah, Joey, you could do it. It's more like, no. And so I'm very, very happy. And I love that story. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new about you. Like, as you mentioned, you and I have been talking a lot the last several days getting ready for this interview, but every time you say something, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know this. I didn't know that. So you've lived an amazing life, and it seems like it's just beginning for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think there's a lot more, but I've been on the downside to that. So I try to keep moments as precious as they are and appreciate them. I don't think I was like that before. Like even through the trauma, I don't think, you know, it was just like going day by day, and that's that, because I think that's all you can do sometimes when you're in that bad place. But, you know, I've met a lot of wonderful people. I've been able to create stuff that's like, again, I think, you know, I think about that. Like I have permanent artwork in the Cosmopolitan of Las Vegas, right? Nobody knows it's me. Nobody, and it doesn't matter. It was just like, it's the same thought as what I just said about Bob. Did Bob stay up at night saying, I wonder if everybody knows that I created Oz? No, he fucking didn't. He just kept making more shit. And it was cooler and cooler and cooler. And then eventually he found dorky little 17-year-old me that was like, oh, holy shit. And he's like, no, this is just what I do.
Yeah.
He was humble. This is why I create. I just create. This is what I know. I guess that's the thing. That's the biggest lesson that I've gotten from so many people, including him, was that we are in so little control in life. I mean, that's what the show is about. Here at the Curioporium, the immediate thing that we do is let somebody in this audience, one of these 6 people, think they are in control of our safety. And they are not in control of our safety. From the very moment I know, they think I pick the person who's the control freak because I feel it. I choose them. I make them make a choice. And then they're like, oh, I'm the protector of the group. I'm in control. And all the while, I know you are absolutely not in control. You do not have what you think you have in your hand. And that comes from that place, right? We have very little that we can control in life. We have kids, we control them to a certain point, and then you got to let them go, right? And that's that. And good things or bad things may happen, whatever. So as an artist, it is a privilege to be able to create, because it's the only thing you can control. You control your choices, your actions. And for an artist, you create what you make and put out to other people. So there's very little of that going on. So I think if you can appreciate, I can control this. So I'm going to make the choices, the best choices I can about this, throw it out there and see who it affects. Yeah. That's what I love about that. And I got that from a lot of different people, but Bob was one of those people that really, because he took time, because he felt, because it wasn't just making art to make money. It wasn't just making art to be famous. It was making art because it lived in him and it needed to come out.
Yeah, I love that.
So I've tried to live that way. Like, this is art that needs to come out because somebody needs to see it. It may not even be me. It might just be someone else saw it and it's like, you know, it goes back to that. Inspiring others. Every word that you choose to say, you need to think about that. And I'm somebody, whether it was part of my autism or just how I am as a person, I was always had to be in control. That was my thing. That is my vice. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. I had to be in control, not of people, but of situations. And it drove me fucking nuts. It killed me. It literally killed me. Like, the surgery that I had back in 2000 was an accumulation of stress from people that did things to me, but also what I did to myself, of trying to control the universe by my actions.
And like that as a young kid?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always, like, you know, growing up, it was always like, I didn't drink because my mom drank, right? So I had to be in control because I knew if I was going to be out somewhere, my friends wanted to drink, I had to be sober to make sure nothing happened to them. So if you take that and multiply it times 1,000, that was my daily thought, was how does this choice affect this person? And it just keeps going to everything. And so it was like, how do I control that? And I thought for years that I was.
Put a lot of pressure on yourself.
It is. It is. The thing, it's funny, you may know this. I think of any of my friends, you might know this reference. The thing that stopped me from doing it was a Twilight Zone episode that I saw much later in life, like in my 20s, mid-20s, that I have never been able to find again. And I know it was an original Rod Serling. I know there was a remake of it, but I know that I saw Rod Serling's version of it in black and white. I don't know what the name of it was, but it was simply about a guy that was obsessed with, he built a mobile in his apartment out of junk. And he thought that everything he added to the mobile controlled something in the universe bad from happening.
I do remember that.
It
I
was
do.
profound. Like, but I've gone to look for it. Like, I remember it. Maybe it's just because I see everything in black and white, but I was damn 100% sure it was one of the original Twilight Zones, and I've never found it since. I saw it on like New Year's Eve. They run the Twilight Zone, you know, marathon. I saw it and I was like, it woke me up, because that's what it's about. This guy spent his entire life living in this hoarder's apartment, building this giant mobile, thinking that everything, he was controlling all the bad stuff from not happening in the universe. That spoke to me. Like, I felt called out. I was like, that's what I do. That's what I do. If I do this or say this, it will stop this thing from happening. Over and over and over. That's how I lived my life. And it was so stressful that it eventually, my body's like, nope, fuck you, out. And that's it. And I'm going to kill you. And so I had this emergency surgery where the doctors were like baffled. They were like, how did you go from, you were here 2 weeks ago, you were fine, and now you're not. And now we have to do an emergency surgery or you're going to die in 24 hours. And I did it.
Wait, at this time, how old were you?
Well, it was 2000. It was 2000 when I had it. So 27, I'm bad at math, ish, somewhere in that range. Too young to have this thing that they haven't even seen a case of in it, really, in anyone. And when you do, they're like over 60. It hit me so quick and took me off. It was like I was fine. And then all of a sudden I just woke up in excruciating pain. And I went to the doctor and they were like, don't know what's going on. And then they did like the CAT scan or whatever. And they're like, we have to get you on the operating table now. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, everything inside of you has grown to 3 sizes its size, fused together. And we need to do surgery now. It was a rare case of ulcerative colitis, which when I had my physical a few weeks prior didn't exist. And then all of a sudden it was like, you know what? Enough of you and your fuckery. Stress is just gonna, like, if you don't, so, I there on the operating table and I'm like, all right, if I get through this, I'm gonna make some changes. And I made a list of changes. And I died on the operating table. They brought me back. They were miracle workers. They brought in surgeons from different states that were like looking at me like I was an alien that was like, we've never seen anything like this before. And it became this weird case study of, it wasn't anything I ate. It wasn't anything I did. It was stress. It was stress. Finally,
Stress is a
caught up
killer.
with me.
People
Yeah.
don't realize how much stress is a killer. While you were on the operating table when you were clinically dead, did you have any experiences?
No, not that has locked it, not that has shown up in my brain. I remember having to relearn everything, like everything, but more so it was like, it was an epiphany, right? It was like, oh, I'm still here. When they explained that I should not be here. And to this day, I mean, I live with like no digestive system and like all these fucking things wrong with me, but I'm still like, I'm big enough. Like I was like, oh, so you ripped everything out of me and I'm still this big. It's like they took everything out, they put in like cinder blocks and puppies and sewed me back up. And it's like, here you go, Joey, operate on that. I don't know how it works. I know that, there is still the constant pain that I deal with every day. I do not let it define me. I do not live in that place where I wake up every day. I am exhausted like I ran a marathon, mentally, physically, and I'm in pain. And if I were to get up every day like that and let that rule my choices for the day, I wouldn't leave my bed. And I just wish for death. Like that's the honest truth to it. So I can't. So when people see me and they see me do what I do, that's where I feel like that got passed down to my son. That is the same, whatever that thing is, that voice in the back of your head that told you, I'm not going to let this define me or stop me. Whatever that is, it's good. And just listen to that voice more often. And many people should. But I just as easily could have gone down that road. And that's where it's like, that's when you fight with your depression. That's when it was like down the road. It was really only the past 6 or 7 years through therapy, really good therapy and EMDR therapy, which I recommend to so many different people if they've gone through trauma. It's something that changed my life.
I want to stop right there. Sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to say, what is EMDR therapy?
Well, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. But EMDR, I'm going to
play one on the Claws
I
Corner.
can't even tell you what the acronym is, so I'll start there. But basically what it is it's a way, there's different ways to do it. It's not a drug. It's using actions, motion, sound in a repetitive ping pong motion to open up your self-conscious or your mind to look at trauma a different way, to be able to control it. And when I was presented with this by my therapist who had worked with EMDR, and since then, like he worked with EMDR for years and then found me and he was like, oh, we can use this for many different ways than what it was meant for. And I'm like a guinea pig and I'm like, yeah, we could try that, whatever. But EMDR has been this, it's like this fucking magic wand that was just like, so here's an example. The way that he does it is he's got, I got headphones and it does this ping ponging tone back and forth, left to right. And in the palm of my hands, you have a paddle that vibrates at the same pace, left to right. And then you go into, it's not even a hypnosis, it's just a thought. So you open up your mind to a thought. So for me, the first thing we tried it with is that I would have nightmares almost every day of my life from something that happened in my childhood. And I would just relive it. And then I'd wake up from that nightmare and I'd still be tethered to it for hours. Like it was enough that it was like crippling my life. So we tried that. So it was like, all right, so put the things on, put the things in your hand, Now think about that moment. Think about that moment in the nightmare. Play it. Close your eyes, play it for a minute. Okay. Come out of it. Okay, now play that same scene, but do something different in it. Do something that you can control in it. And then put the thing back on, blah, do it again. And then do it again. And then do it again. So a session might last for an hour. You could go back and do it 2 or 3 times. But when I tell you that we did this, like we did it 4 or 5 times, just sitting there within an hour. And I thought of different synopsises of that moment while doing that. I have not had the nightmare since. Because what it did is it gave me control over the moment. It didn't erase, because the nightmare was based on a trauma, on something that happened. So it didn't erase the memory. It simply gave me the control over the moment so that when I'm in it, if I were to have the nightmare again, I'm in control. And I choose to do something else. So my brain then is in this place where it's like, no, it happened. Okay, fine. You would make a better decision now. Yep. I've spent my life planning for the worst. That's how I ended up on the operating table. I spent my life thinking of the worst case scenario for every single thing that could happen to me or anyone that I loved for years. And that knowledge for people, because I know there's people out there that do that. They plan for the worst. They spend their entire life worrying. And worrying is good until it transforms you into something you don't like. Worrying is good is because it makes you, because it means that you care. But when it goes out of control to the point where you're so worried about something going wrong that it freezes you in fear and that's all you live in, then you're not living anymore. But what it is doing, unbeknownst to people, unbeknownst to me, was that I finally got to a place where I had played scenarios so much in my head of the bad thing happening that I finally got to an age when I was like 45, maybe ish, probably a bit sooner, maybe 40, where I was like, you know what? If something bad happens, I'm either going to know what to do immediately, because I was always good at emergencies when bad stuff would happen, traumas, earthquakes, having to be in charge of a situation. Not only did I know what to do immediately and went into action instead of shutting down, which is what other people do, but the other thing is, like, all those worst case scenarios I came up with didn't happen, right? I think it's John Mulaney who said, I spent a lot more time as a child worrying about quicksand that it would be a major problem in my life than I needed to because of cartoons. That's exactly it, right? You plan like, oh shit, if I run into quicksand in the forest, I need to know what Bugs Bunny would do to get out of this, right? That's essentially people who worry all the time. What they're doing is they are building up an immunity and a power, like a superpower, to be in charge when something goes wrong. But you don't have to spend your life doing it. And that was the change. That was the change that I made after I survived.
I think that therapy is good for 2 reasons. One, help you get over or help you with the depression. And also, it probably made you a better storyteller because you had to come up with new endings, new storylines, new ways to undo what already happened. So I love the fact that therapy not only helped you with one, but it also helped your creative process by creating stories over and over and over again to make you put you into a better place.
Yeah, I think, and using it on depression was something that was a trial. Like, he hadn't done it before. But what it did for me as an artist is that's where I started down the road, which I talk about this in my art and trauma series, of where I had always drawn the monsters that I create, because I make monsters, I make monster suits, I draw monsters, I always have. I'm very much like Guillermo del Toro. When I found him in my life, I was like, he gets it. The humans are the monsters. The monsters aren't the monsters. The monsters are there to help the good people who believe in them. You know, I spent my life being told by my own mother that I was a monster. And I grew up thinking that. So when you grow up thinking that, then you're afraid all the time of what you could become. When I had grown up seeing what you could become if you're a monster, you don't want it to, you don't want a Bruce Banner out into Hulk, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest, that in Avengers, that moment with Bruce Banner was an epiphany for me. That's what woke me up to. He spent the entire, like we know what he becomes. And he spent the entire movie saying, you want to know what my secret is? And getting interrupted. And then he finally gets to the moment and he's like, I'm angry all the time. That moment when he said that was like this light bulb went off in my head where it's like, and then he controls the monster. He uses the monster to help someone in that moment because he understands that's part of him. He does, you don't get rid of depression. If you lived with depression, the depression is part of you. And that's what I learned through EMDR because I had assumed, I have spent since a childhood making monsters, drawing monsters, that the depression was a monster. Like I physically drew it. And then in EMDR, I got to talk to it. And not only did I get to talk to it, but I got to reason with it. And I realized that it's not going away because it's part of you. It makes you who you are, but it needs to come out sometimes. It doesn't need to come out when you are trying to function, but that needs to be a discussion. So now that I've made it into a monster, I can talk to the monster. I can't talk to something that's depression that is just a blob.
Yeah.
That's a shadow. That's whatever I was thinking in my head for years was that, oh, the darkness is it's the darkness. That's what depression is. And eventually I was like, well, my therapist was like, well, what if you had to design your depression into a monster, what would it look like? So I did. And because I did that, I suddenly found a form of something that monsters understand people. And honestly, they try not to be them. Because we have more monsters. I think that's what I love about Guillermo del Toro's stories, where the monsters are the people, right? So I designed my depression, and I had a conversation with it, and I said, you know what? It came from this long, this whole mind-altering conversation where it's like, what does the depression look like when it comes in the room? Oh, well, it's darkness that comes through this window until it engulfs everything and it finally gets to me. And then I'm in depression world until it goes away. And my therapist did the EMDR and he's like, so why isn't there a light in the room? Why isn't the light bigger? Why is it a room? Why does it have more windows? Why does it have a ceiling? So in doing that with every moment of those minute things and questioning it, and then finally just getting into a place where it's me and the creature and having a conversation with it. It was this weird, how does this work? How am I now having a conversation with whatever it is in my head? But I did. And what it did was it's like, all right, I need to be here. The depression needs to be here. So how about this? You come out when I go to sleep. I go to sleep, you can come out and you can play. When I wake up, you go back to sleep. And that's what I did. So now the depression is there because, like you said before, I think negative things, trauma, is what fuels an artist. It's what fuels my art. So it can't go away. So it has to find a way to be productive. So it clocks in when I go to sleep. And it starts making this in my head. And then I wake up and I design it. And now it's got time. So it's been up. So it feels like it has purpose. If we don't find the things that are wrong with us and find a purpose for them, then we just keep bashing ourselves into what the people who don't like us want us to be.
And go back to where so many people might find that so debilitating that they're going to become paralyzed with depression, never leave the couch, never leave their bed. And I like the fact that you're using your depression as fuel for your creativity. And speaking of that, is that the origin of Dr. Grymm? Because of your depression, did that come through your depression? that character?
It did. It more so came from a place of being bullied. It came from when I was growing up and being the youngest of a family of four, my brother and my other sister would bully me relentlessly just because they're siblings, right? That was a sibling thing. It didn't turn into abuse till later. But my older sister, who I lost, Laura, she was my bodyguard, right? She was my protector. So when she was gone, and then my father wasn't in my life anymore, not by his choice, I had no protector. I wasn't liked at school. I was the weird kid at school. It was basically like if the Muppets hated Gonzo, that was my life. Like that was it, Yeah. Because he's too weird. Like that was what I felt like. I felt like Gonzo. And I did not fit in. There's nothing else like me. That's why when I think Muppets from Space, like I loved, because I was like, there you go. That like solved another problem in me. I go to movies quite a bit to like fill in those little gaps. But yeah, Dr. Grymm came from bullying. Like I was like, if I could be the person to stand up for me, how would I do it? And for me, it was born out of a few different places. I loved Westerns. My dad loved Westerns. And I loved in Westerns, even in modern Westerns, I love the concept that it's like you get this small town in the middle of fucking nowhere, and this guy, this badass guy is coming to town and everybody's afraid of him, right? They may have never met him. All they got is a fucking poster on the wall and it's like, he's wanted and stay away from that asshole.
Yeah.
The power of that suggestion was fascinating to me because it was like, that's a story, right? That's where storytelling throughout history, throughout like from the beginning of time, when we learned to fear the dark, like we learned to fear just based on people telling us something. And that grew in our heads to a detriment or to creative people to be able to create that side of things. So for me, it was fascinating that it's like, people would visibly be shaken by the thought that this person is coming. So what if we created a story around this character that everyone thought was a badass, that was like, do not fuck with this person? And that became his reputation. But not only that, but then this character became a bad guy. He became the shell. He became the facade of a bad guy to lure other bad people to him, because that's what negative shit does, right? It attracts it to basically lure them to their for revenge. So, and this was when I was like 14, 15, I came up with Dr. Grymm. And it was by science and building stuff. Like I had all these weird concepts of machines that would backfire on bad people. Like bad people would hire him to build something. He knew they were bad. He'd take their money, build the thing. It would backfire on them. He'd be long gone. And that was the concept. That was it. But the fact that they sought out a bad guy, while as everyone else was afraid of him, in reality, he was doing good, but he didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want anyone at arm's length because he lost. He knew what it was like to lose, so he didn't want to bring anyone else to hurt like that again. So the only thing he had in his life that he loved, because he lost everybody that was a person, was his dog, who was the steam pug. He rescued the dog. He kept the dog alive for years, and that was his reason for being. And that is I'm not even going to avoid it. That came from the Grinch. That was the reason I knew the Grinch he's good. He's just in a bad place. Yeah. He's depressed, he's angry, he's grumpy, he's frustrated. But he takes care of a dog. So he must be okay. That's what I thought as a kid. Yeah. That's why I was like, the Grinch isn't the bad guy here. He just is in unfortunate circumstances where everyone wants him to be fucking happy. And he doesn't want to be, because he has no reason to be, because he's had trauma.
I think
So-
it's very, well, I just want to say one thing. I think it's very intelligent at 14 or 15 years old to have that kind of insight.
because I think I grew up way more adult than I needed to be. I was forced to be the adult in my household and take care of everything. So people who have to do that, I mean, working in the school system now and being around kids, like I see it. I could see it every day. This one particular kid that was just, she was working 2 jobs after school to take care of her mom and her siblings, and just, she was the adult at 16. And I saw that and I was like, I know how that kid feels, because that's what I was. I had to be the adult. I had to make the good decisions. I had to be right all the time. And nothing was ever good enough. So it was just a constant circle of, is this good enough? I'm going to try harder. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to try. Nope. Now you're dead. That's it. Right. So I think at 14, I was 60 in my head. At a very young age, I was just a very adult thinking, but I also was just somebody who, like, I escaped into movies and television. So like, I watched stuff that was wet. Like I grew up on the Twilight Zone, the Honeymooners, Dick Van Dyke. I grew up with TV was my babysitter. So, All in the Family was one of those shows that, like, I saw how horrible my family was through Archie Bunker. Archie Bunker was not the hero of that show. And you could sit there and you could watch that show and think, Norman Lear, like, fuck. I mean, he was so ahead of his time. But those shows were crafted to show the faults in ourselves, the humility in ourselves. And at a young age, I watched that show and I was like, he's wrong. He's wrong. But what kid was doing that at like 8 years old, watching All in the Family? First of all, that was entranced in it, but then seeing not only how he was just within his own family, and his own humility, but how I was seeing racism in my home, and then I'm watching it on TV, and I'm learning at a very young age, that's wrong. Yeah. Like, I lived in a very white privileged town where there was one person of color growing up. And that's all I was exposed to. So I became friends with that person because I had to. Because I felt like, underdogs need to stick together. Like, so going back to Dr. Grymm.
That's very impressive.
I
Were you an empath back then as well?
I didn't know it. I think that was part of the gathering of all those escape plans and emotions. Like, it took me a while, again, in therapy with this particular therapist that I've been working through for years. When I became aware that not only could I could obviously create things in my head and build them, but then if I could reverse engineer and build things in my head in circumstances, like, I realized that, like, shielding, right? So as an empath, you need to learn how to shield your other people's emotions from coming in, not shut them off. Like, I spent years tethering to people's emotions that I would never meet again, just by coming in contact with them. So it becomes in your head. One of my old bosses at the Mark Twain House once said to me, when he realized all the trauma I had gone through, like, he heard the stories and then he witnessed it. And he's like, he witnessed how I could tell when somebody's having a bad day, when somebody's hurting. I don't even have to be near them. I just know them and I know something is going wrong. I have saved so many people from unaliving themselves. And he finally saw it happen to someone that it should not have happened. And he's like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I just know. I just know that somebody needs help. So it's like a spidey sense, right? It just goes off. But for me, it was like, I was tethering to people that I met like in kindergarten and I hadn't talked to, and now I'm 27 and I still know when something's going wrong with them, but I don't know who it is. So it's like having 1,000 windows open on your computer and one of them is playing Mambo No. 5 and you can't find it. That's what it's like. That Mambo number 5 is causing you pain and you don't know where it's coming from and you can't stop it. But then I finally figured out a way to purge and restart my brain. And that was through EMDR as well. That was just again, just talking to my therapist who has worked miracles with me, was like, all right, so you can't stop what's happening. So going with the computer thing, right? I was thinking, so in my head, I had built it up to this enormous thing where it finally became the scene in Jurassic Park where they were like, we need to shut down the system and reboot it. So that's what I thought. That's where I went to in the EMDR. I suddenly was like, okay, me and Samuel L. Jackson, he's going to shut down my brain and say, hold on to your butts, and then power it back up. And now we're going to start from scratch. And it made me very frightening because all that noise that is built up has now shut down. That's what I needed to do. And then from that, I then built a control panel in my head, which I'm not even going to pretend it's not nerdy, is a control panel for the TARDIS from Doctor Who. And it controls how I let emotions in and go out. So there's sliders. They're not, nope, I'm going to block this person. It's not like that. You can like open your window a little. That's how it is. So it's a physical manifestation of that thing living in my head. Instead of all the noise, I can clearly just see a control panel. When I need to control it, I just do it. And that's how now I have learned to be able to control the noise, the stress, the worry, is by a control panel that I designed. And by finally shutting off all the noise that didn't serve me anymore and really tried to kill me.
But you also had some issues when you rewired your brain. You had to relearn a lot of things. Like you said before in the past, I've listened on your videos, you had to relearn how to write again. You had to teach yourself how to play piano again and other things. So was that an effect that wasn't supposed to happen?
That was from the surgery. So it was really when there's been a few traumas in life that have caused me to have like this Swiss cheese memory, for lack of a better term. Kind of like Scott Bakula on I just forget the name of the show. What's the name of the show? Yeah, thank you. That's what it felt like. But no, when I woke up from the surgery, I think that's what the going to the other side or whatever happened did to me, was it shut down everything. So the stuff that I've learned in therapy over the past few years has repaired some stuff. But back then when it happened, it was like, oh, so for instance, I used to be able to draw anything in many different styles. And then I could sculpt okay. When the trauma happened with the surgery, I suddenly was able to not draw very well, but I could sculpt in 3D way better than I used to. Okay. Now, why my brain decided to do that, I don't fully understand. But like, you know, it's like, even here, like Nathan will say, can you like draw what you're thinking? And I'm like, I get really frustrated because I know how I used to draw, and now it's like just sketchy, right? It's sketchy. That's how I draw, unless I'm doing it for a client of which I have to have control and it has to have a certain style. My stuff is just like, rah. But I can see it in 3D. So if I go and get some clay, I can just make it. And that is a weird, beautiful thing. Like my brain is still trying to tell the other part of my brain how to make it happen. I just need to find a different way to make it happen. So it's just a different obstacle. I had to retrain myself to understand color again, because to go back to that, I don't tell clients that I'm colorblind. I ask them the questions and they have to answer me. I do not tell them. I do not tell them until they come back and say, oh my God, this color, like your color choices were beautiful. And then I'm like, you want to know what my secret was? I can't see what you see. So that rewiring of stuff has been, it's been a lot of little things. Like I was never able to play. I took 9 years of piano. I can't play piano anymore. My right hand wants to do what my left hand does. I can't type the way I used to. You remember when you used to take typing in school?
Oh, yeah.
I was really good at it. I can't do that anymore. Now it's just this, right? So something definitely rewired my brain. And I just found a different way to do things. But really it was like, most of that was like, it's just whatever. I can type like that. Who cares? You know, I'm not in a secretarial pool, so whatever. But the art part of it was just figuring things out. And I found that now I could see in 3D better, which to me was that was a plus, because my entire life, like I went into animation, right? I'm going to backtrack. I went into I thought of my entire life, I thought I wanted to be an animator, right? I wanted to be Chuck Jones. That's what I wanted to do. So I lived in Looney Tunes, like I lived in Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers cartoons and Disney, and I wanted to be an animator. And then I got to animation school and I was like, I do not want to be an animator. I do not want to spend 12 years inking other people's, I don't want to be Banksy. I don't want to sit here and ink everybody else's work for 12 years before I could even possibly maybe be the story designer or director on a story. Nope. I want to build stuff that people can walk into. And at the time, even though I love theme parks, I was kind of like not on that like, oh, people do this for a living. Like they just grow out of the ground, you know, like Disney World just popped out of nowhere. I had no concept until I really got to college, and it was around like Bob Winquist who designed this stuff. And then through a friend, I got to meet Mark Davis, right? Mark Davis was one of Disney's original 9 old men. He created not only in the animation world, like he did Maleficent, Tinkerbell, but he also created Disneyland's Bear Country Jamboree and Pirates of the Caribbean. Like he was a theme park designer, and I got to meet him and I got to learn from him and just like take his knowledge. And then it was like, why don't we, like that school, CalArts used to teach theme park design, and then they stopped after Epcot was built. And then so we and a group of my nerdy friends said, hey, would you be willing to teach this again? And they were like, sure. So they did. And then we just started, that's it. We just started our own new version of learning theme park design, which is what I ended up majoring in. But I did, to think that my entire life I wanted to do this thing, I was so focused on it. That's all I wanted to do. I did not apply to any other college except for CalArts. CalArts gets close to 2,000 applications a year. They accept 26 people to the animation program. I sent in my portfolio failed. They were like, oh, we'll just try again next year. I was like, no. How much time do I have to resubmit a portfolio? And they were like 2 weeks. And I was like, all right, I'll be back in 2 weeks. And I made a brand new portfolio. And they were like, and I got in and I got a scholarship. I did not want to wait another year. And then when I got there, it was just like, well, this isn't what I want to do. Oh no. And then it was like just finding the right people again, finding the people who got me, and having somebody like Bob Winquist there who's like, oh yeah, you could do that. Yeah. Okay. To be around those people who are your support system and are pushing you to do that thing that you have no fucking idea how to do, like you need to surround yourself with those people.
You surrounded yourself with some pretty big people. And tell my viewers some of the other people that you were either lectured by or mentored by. I think it was all with that school, if I'm correct.
Some of it was. I mean, it's not like I'm not a name dropper by any means, and some of these people like don't even like. I was able to be like, because I worked at Landmark Entertainment, which is the company that does most of Universal's rides. So I started interning there quickly within school, and I got to meet Stan Winston, and I got to meet Steven Spielberg, and I got to like be in the room with them when they're doing what they do. Rick, I just forgot his name. Damn it.
I'm going to say Frank Oz.
Rick Baker. Just Tim Burton was an alum of the school, so he would come and talk all the time, and just I was just a sponge. I was just like Frank Oz came and did a lecture. You know, there were so many influential people that would show up at CalArts, and like the whole point of CalArts was like, you know, you're there for 4 years. It wasn't a master's program if you're in the animation and film department, which technically I still was. My first year I did animation, and then I quickly was like, nope, I want to start doing theme park stuff. So it's like we worked on a ride, and they gave us like a little closet room to do our display. And we took that, we filled it. And then the next year we made a bigger thing. The next year we made a bigger thing, and I was directing it. And it was just like that, you know, there were people coming in to see everybody's work, and then they'd be there to see my work. And that was just humbling. That to be, you know, my last year there, I had worked on a ride that was told to me by Imagineers was impossible to build. And yet so much stuff that I designed was so forward ahead and thinking, it exists now.
Yeah.
The sucky thing about CalArts is that it's owned by Disney, so whatever you think of belongs to them. That's just that's the unfortunate part. But I've always looked at it like, see, I told you that would fucking work. I knew it would work, and it does. So to be around people like that are like the South Park guys, like we were talking about that earlier today. Like they are just so smart. They are so intelligent in their comedy. They are the ones that were like, in building this, in doing the story for this, and doing the improv, it's really comes from their thought process of how they write, which is, you know, this happens because this happens, but then this happens, which causes this to happen. Like that's how they write every show. Every show is a cause and effect, which is why South Park is better than Family Guy.
Oh, definitely, without
right?
a doubt. And you know
So,
what? You know what I love about them is that they are probably the greatest satirists of the 21st century. Their genius is that kids are laughing at it for one reason, adults are laughing at it for a completely different reason, and each episode is so spot on. They're always making so many great points, and they're poking fun at everybody, and they never take themselves seriously. And as we talked about earlier off the air, they've done this since the beginning. One of their college films was a movie called Cannibal the Musical, and Trey Parker put so much detail into that movie. He says nobody's even going to know this, nobody's even going to care about it, but I do. I care, and I know. And the cartoons look so crude, but as you mentioned, it's way funnier than Family Guy. It's much better than The Simpsons are now, because The Simpsons, I think, have definitely jumped the shark a long time ago. And I will always love The Simpsons. But yeah, Family Guy, or not Family Guy, South Park, I don't watch on a regular basis, but whenever I turn it on, I'm still laughing.
but beyond that, like their whole thing about, like, when they were in college, they wanted to be musicians, right? They wanted to be in a band, and they didn't. But then they started writing musicals, and when South Park the musical, so South Park the movie ended up at the Oscars. Holy shit! That broke that. That was something that was like no one was expecting. But the music for that, the music for Cannibal the Musical, the music for Orgasmo, the Book of Mormon. I mean, now they're on Broadway, right? Like, what the fuck? Like, their way of thinking about things is so like, holy shit, I shouldn't be laughing at this, but I'm gonna laugh at this. And I think that's the thing, like, right? That's why it resonates so much with people. Like, again, like I didn't stop watching South Park out of like not wanting to watch it. I just didn't have Comedy Central anymore, and then didn't have TV. But then, it's like I'll pop on every once in a while, and I'm like, it's still relevant, funny, just funny. But in going back and listening to them talk about story building, It's that simple concept that is different from how those shows work, right? South Park is going from an incident that affects an incident that causes another incident, and that's why it stays fresh.
Yes.
It's simply bouncing that, what happens that causes that to happen, and that's the whole show. Like, and it may never get resolved, or it might, but regardless, you went on this ride and it was like, oh, that was really good, right? It typically does get resolved, but I think that to think about your story, like that's how life is, right? That's how life is. This happened, that affect this happened, this caused this to happen. What happens because of that? Like that's how we live day to day. And I spent so much time focusing on that. When they said it, I was like, oh, that's good for stories. It's not good for living your life to try and figure that shit out ahead of time. Like that was the difference, right? I was trying to control that and what was going to happen. And that's not how life works. So it's good to use as a storyteller, definitely. But being around people like that, being around creative people, listening to Frank Oz talk about film, and then bringing out Grover and just having Grover talk to a bunch of almost adults where we're all like just a kid again. Like suddenly it's just like Frank Oz has disappeared and here's Frank Oz. Fulfilled like so many, like I never got to meet Jim Henson. I would have loved to. You know, I did get to meet Chuck Jones. I got to sit at his drawing table. I got to like, he handed me his Blackwing pencil and said, try this pencil. And he let me keep it. And it's like, I still have that pencil. And it was like, you know, those little moments where I don't care how much time I spent with them. I guess now it's like, you know, people go to conventions and like they get to go meet those people. Yeah. But this was personal. This was being in Mark Davis's house while he talks about, well, you know, animatronics shouldn't be there, you know, like he was like a grumpy old guy, but he was so fun. He was so pissed off that animatronics had to be so lifelike that they had to blow their nose. He was so upset at that. And I was like, that's brilliant. Like that was hilarious. Thurl Ravenscroft, being able to sit in a room with Thurl Ravenscroft, reading a script that I wrote and recording it, that still exists today, and it's the last thing he ever read. Like I'm honored, and yeah. And then to sit there and when the microphone was off, just have him telling stories. He told this story how he was like, it was like we packed up the mic, and I was so sorry for this. We packed up the mic, and he's there. One of the people on my crew was like, "So do you just get to eat Frosted Flakes for free?" That's what they asked him. And because if you're going to meet Thurl Ravenscroft, right, that's what they thought of to ask him. And he's like, you know what? I did that 40 fucking years. And he said, in Thurl, I can't do it justice. I did that 45 fucking years ago. I have gotten one free box of, what is it? Frosted Flakes. And it was not fucking great. That's what he said. And I was like, funny. I was just like, oh my God. That was, and we were in his retirement home. Like he just like got an office and we went, but he was so amazing. He was just like, you know, you often hear this, like, don't meet your heroes. And I haven't found that to be a horrible thing. You know, because I've gained something from it. Like, and it's because of that. It's not in the Comic-Con, like, oh, I'm going to go to a booth and have them sign it. I never have anything signed. It was just like the one thing anybody I've ever met that I wanted to meet. I just wanted to say thank you because they're a little part of what makes me me. Chuck Jones, especially. Like Chuck Jones, when I heard the quote, you know, I go to sleep and I dream that I'm Bugs Bunny and I wake up and I'm Daffy Duck. Like I got that. I felt that. I felt called out. But that's how he felt, right? Jim Henson, like learning about Jim Henson's life and who he was. Carol Spinney, same thing. Like these people, and I got to meet Carol Spinney before he passed, which was wonderful, just right here in Hartford, you know. Those little people, like they're just like the movies that we watch, the books that we read, I think it's, and I know I said this earlier, but I love High Fidelity. I love the movie, the book, High Fidelity. But he says that, like, you know, you shouldn't judge people. You totally should, you know, the things that people like make them who they are, right? That is where they're getting their experience from if they don't have good people around them to make those experiences. So whether it be moments in a movie, you know, it's like I'm constantly like, I'll watch a movie 1,000 times and then suddenly it'll hit me a different way. Did it just the other day with Serenity. I was watching Serenity and it was like, oh, this means this. Like, you know, same with it's so meeting people like that, it's always been like not who they are, not what they who they are, not what they've made, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And that's why I asked you. I know you mentioned before you don't like the name drop, but I think that's great that you surround yourself, maybe not intentionally, but with the best of the best in what you want to do. The one person that I would have loved to have met out of everybody, everything you just mentioned, would be Mel Blanc. I just thought that guy was a genius. The way that he brought everything to life, so many different characters, all completely different voices. And for somebody watching a cartoon, you'd have no idea that all those voices are one guy.
Yeah, and I grew up on that. Like I immediately was drawn to that. We were talking about that earlier. Like voiceover was something I dabbled in college, which was a dream, like another dream job. You know, I always wanted to do voiceovers, but getting to meet Mel Blanc, and realistically, like my older son now, who's going to college for doing voiceover work and technology communications, that's what he wanted to do. And it was, and this is me. This is his nerdy dad. I sat him down as a youngster, as an experiment. I sat him down because I was like, you know what? Cartoons are shit right now. Like they're commercials, right? Every cartoon is a commercial for a toy. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's going to be the experiment to see where this lands. I sat my kid down. I put on Duck Amuck, which is not like any other of Bugs Bunny cartoons. And I sat him down and I just wanted to see his reaction. So I just watched him, and I watched him crack up at Daffy just giving the side eye, just the way he said something, not that he had the speech impediment, but that how he was getting so riled up, and just like it just built and built, and then it was like ridiculously stupid what he was saying, and then Bugs revealing at the end that he was the one masterminding it. He had no idea who these things were at all. I wanted to see, does this resonate with other people? Because I was fascinated by that as a kid and in high school. Like I took psychology and I was like, do cartoons exist because we tether ourselves to them emotionally? Like we find parts of us in them. And that was like my thesis in high school. Because I found that interesting, that it's like we grew up as kids, especially like you and I, like we grew up on cartoons that like, that's not how they are now. Like that you can't replicate some of that stuff. The Tex Avery stuff. I mean, just like this stuff was made for adults. And, you know, it's like, I still like classical music. I listen to classical music because of Looney Tunes. Yeah. Like that's where I found it. I would have never heard it otherwise. And I was like, holy shit, like this is, you know,
the sad part is that they can't even do that anymore, because now in this PC world, oh no, they're promoting violence. First of all, it's a coyote and it's Roadrunner. You're not going to want to go out and kill somebody by watching an Acme explosion. But second of all, they're making fun of speech impediments. No, I never looked at that as a kid or even as an adult and said, oh my God, they're being mean to Elmer Fudd. They're being mean to Daffy Duck. I just thought it was hilarious. It was a great cartoon. It was funny. And as you said, yeah, cartoons are just not the same anymore. And that's why I'll go back to South Park again. South Park is still funny because it's adult humor, but they play to the kids. And that's, I said, part of their genius.
Yeah.
In other words,
and I mean that, I mean, look, You can Google it. I have never killed someone with an anvil. And I watched Looney Tunes every fucking day. Like,
Dude.
it never affected me in that way. And I always was like, yeah, no. It's the same people who are like, oh no, Dungeons and Dragons is a gateway to Satan. What are you talking about? Like, you're always going to have those people that don't fucking get it, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's, again, like, I'm not even going to waste time with that. But it was like those things, like, I was so enamored by that, and then I passed it on to my kid, right?
Good.
And then my kid was like, we're gonna watch Mel Blanc on David Letterman. Now that you've watched Bugs Bunny, I'm gonna show you the genius of Mel Blanc, hopping from character to character to character to character, just sitting there, just letting them come out. And I was so impressed by that as whatever I was, a performer, whatever I thought I could be, because I was like, he doesn't care. These characters live inside him and they just come out, you know, flawlessly. And he can just come up with the stuff, you know? And that was what powered me to like want to be that kind of an entertainer. But certainly when my son watched it, like then he became obsessed with it. Like and to this day, like he knows more about voiceover work than I ever will, because because of the days we spent sitting on the couch talking, watching the Muppets, listening to all those voices, and like, oh, you know, Frank Oz does this and this and this, but he's also Yoda, and you can hear Grover in Yoda, and then it's twisted to do that, you know, like finding those physicalities of like how when you do this with your mouth and you move your neck and this makes a different sound. That was stuff that we would sit around doing. And to this day, like he does stuff at college and he does all these different voices. And I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of him on like 1,000 different levels. I can't even pick one to say, but it's like, that comes from that. That comes from like, those are the good things that I think, you know, he could have gotten a lot of bad shit from me being a broken individual, because I didn't hide my broken person to him. But he got the best parts of me and grew them into something, and from his mom, and like just it grew it into this outstanding thing. And I think it's because we can sit down for hours on the phone and talk about nerdy shit. Like, you know, I introduced him to Kevin Smith just a few years ago, and I'm like, we're going to sit down and we're going to watch Clerks. Like, he had no idea, you know, that was a 90s thing. And just the takeaway from it, we're going to watch a Quentin Tarantino film. We're going to watch a scene and then take apart that scene and look at like, why was that like that? Like, what was the power of that? You know?
Let me ask you a question then. I want to talk about that. Or so for you, what's your favorite, for you and your son, what's your favorite Kevin Smith movie?
Oh God.
I did remember really quick, we'll do a callback to something we were talking about off the air. The name of the movie I was thinking about was called Yoga Hosers, with Johnny Depp's daughter, with because their neighbors, their kids went to school together and they just wanted to hang out. And basically, it's funny, Johnny Depp plays a character in that movie. I wouldn't have never guessed it was him. And they did, he was in Tusk originally, that character. He said, I want to do that character again. So they said, all right, you brought him back for Yoga Hosers. But for me, I have to say, out of all the movies, I mean, I like probably Dogma, but I also like Dogma and Clerks too. I think because Clerks is funny. Yeah. Actually, no, you know what? There's the movie, I can't remember the name of it now. It's called, where it's more of a serious drama, where it's
Chasing Amy.
That's good too, but it wasn't that one. It was another one that came out with you. It's one of those movies you would have never guessed it was Kevin Smith. He wasn't in it. Didn't have any of the characters in it. It had John Goodman as a cop, and it was those people that were they were protesting funerals. Red State. That's the movie I'm thinking of. That was my all-time favorite Kevin Smith movie. Really? That's not a Kevin Smith movie, really. It's nothing like he would ever do. But I have to say, for Kevin Smith, with his normal movies, would be Clerks 2, because I think the characters were way more developed, and he had a bigger budget, and the story was better. And I always get shit for that. Oh my God, Clerks is a classic. I said Clerks was a good movie to start him off on, but then he took it to another level, and that's why I think that Red State and Dogma are my three favorites for Kevin Smith.
I think for me, if I'm gonna get to pick three, then it is simply on a storytelling, not even on a budget. Clerks 2 it's Clerks 2, it's Chasing Amy, and it's Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Yes, that's another good one too.
That movie definitely is like, I mean, it's fucking hilarious. It is so balls to the wall, just do what they want to do. It's wonderful. And I have never met, like, I've been in the room with Kevin Smith, like here in Hartford, like we were talking about. He's one of those people I would love to meet, like, and just, he's one of those people that you feel like you could just sit down and have a drink with and talk to, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I would be afraid. I think older Joey would be afraid too. I think now it would be like, I just want to thank you for what you do. Like that. I think that's the way to approach some of this, is not put people on a pedestal, but look how they have changed your life, either as the artists they are or by the art they make, right? Because that, again, it comes down to, what did I learn from that? Dogma is like a close tie with Chasing Amy.
Yeah.
Like, I love Dogma, I really do. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant on a whole different level. But that's the power of Kevin Smith, to be kind of in the same mindset as the South Park guys. In that, like, being able to do that balance of heart and story and sarcasm and just fucking wrong with a moral. That is like, how did you do that? How did you do that? How did you weave together all of that and put a shit monster in the movie? Like, what?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That is genius. And that's when it comes down to, like, those people are just genius in being able to do that. And some people would never even think to watch it because it's not their thing. And that's where, you know, that I think that's a bigger separation of like, do you watch Kevin Smith movies or do you not? Like, you know, this isn't those are the really tough hitting questions, I think, that, you know, we really need to be looking at, that are a person's character.
I think even more than his movies, I love listening to him talk at colleges. And you mentioned you saw him in Hartford. I saw him. He was promoting Yoga Hosers. It was his birthday. He came out on stage. His daughter roasted him. Jason Mewes was there. A lot of the cast members from the movie were there. But I love listening to him. And I was telling you about this. One of my favorite specials, I think, was 3 hours long. It was one question. What was it like working with Bruce Willis? 3 hours long it took him, but I can listen to this guy talk and talk and talk, because he never drones on. He's never boring. He's always entertaining. And whatever he says is usually, no, always, for me anyway, very interesting and exactly what either I'm thinking or never thought about before. Like, wow, you know, I like that. So I love listening to, sort of like Henry Rollins. I like him as an actor. I like him as a musician in Black Flag and the Rollins Band. But for me, the spoken word, I've seen him every year since the mid 90s. I just saw him recently at Toe's Place. I can listen to this guy talk for hours. I never get bored with him. And yeah, there's some people that just have that ability to go on stage and just be themselves, and you learn from them and you're inspired by them, and they put out some great content.
Well, I think that it's because they're teachers, right? I mean, that they didn't go into that profession. And I think I fall into that category where it's like, they're trying to help people. Like, they aren't these pretentious dicks that are like, oh, I got here and I'm not going to tell you how.
Yeah,
Figure
exactly.
it the fuck out. Bye. You know, it's not like that. They're very much like, welcome to my TED Talk, and here's where we're going to go. Kevin Smith, I mean, really what it comes down to, like in most of his talks, is like when people ask him, well, how do you write? How do you make your movies? And it's simple. Tell your story. You're here to tell your story. Tell your story. And that, on its principle of concept, you either get it or you don't. And I think so many people who are trying to like get into the business, you're not getting into the business to be Kevin Smith. You're not getting, like, if you are trying to become famous, you're on the wrong path. Like, you're just, you know, there are people who'd luck out. Sure. You know, why the Kardashians exist, we don't know yet. but it hasn't happened yet. So what the fuck? But they've had plenty of opportunity to prove while they're on Earth. But whatever, you know, that's just the universe we live in, where, you know, Netflix will cancel the Dark Crystal series, but keep Joe Tiger around because it's cheap to make and it's a train wreck, right? That's the world we live in, unfortunately, where it's like quality versus quantity versus distraction,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And those people that I have surrounded myself with, that I have learned from, that I eagerly wait for their next story, like Kevin Smith, like Guillermo del Toro, comes from that, comes from the fact that they are teachers, whether they like it or not, because they are putting out this way to, here's how you can do it too. You can do it too. I mean, if you just say that, like, I know in being able to be in a classroom of kids, whether it's teaching them how to sculpt something or make cosplay, or teaching them music like I did last year, or art, letting them know that they can do it too is one of the most powerful things you can tell someone.
Yeah.
And I don't think Kevin Smith is, like, they're not physically using those words. Sometimes they are, but I think that's such an important thing to do with people in general, to let them know you have a talent. I don't care if it's an art, like, may not be this label of an artist, but you have a talent. That talent might be talking to people. That talent might be whatever it is. You have it, find it, fucking use it, and you can do this too. Like, like, I only had one teacher, really. That's a lie. I had 3 teachers growing up, and it wasn't until 5th grade that knew that I was different for a good reason. But they were the ones who were like encouraging me, supporting me when I didn't have it in my own house. Those people were the ones who were like, yeah, you could totally do that. Those people who knew I had learning issues, that I was like, I don't understand math because I'm afraid of it, but you understand art. So how do you make art into a math problem, or vice versa? Which is why I started doing the series about turning art into trauma, or turning trauma into art. Because of that. Because I think if you look at your problem in a different way, if somebody tells you, just look at it this way, it's not as frightening. So when people of importance use their platform to say, you can do this too, on any level, I think that's the best thing you can do with your privilege of being able to make it this far in life and create. Like, that's what you're here for. So I can only hope to be like those people that I admire in doing whatever I do on any given day with whatever I create or whoever I talk to. That's the thought in my head. I'm not going to be the next Kevin Smith. I'm not going to be the next Jim Henson, but I love their message. So I'm going to pass it on, and hopefully it gets to the right person. So.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because did you ever hear of Evan Carmichael? He has on YouTube, yes, the top 10 list. I watch those all the time, and I was listening to Bruce Lee's just last night, and he was saying, he goes, don't copy somebody that you admire. Be yourself. You could be inspired by them, but create your own personality, create your own way. Don't say, oh, I like this trait in a person, I want to be just like that. No, be just like you. And you could always, and somebody, it was another top 10 from another creative person, I can't remember who said this, but they were saying, aren't you worried about all these imitators? He goes, no, they're always going to be known as, like, say, I can't remember, I'll say Bruce Lee Jr. They're not going to be known as their own person. And they're always going to be one step behind me, because I'm going to keep moving forward. He goes, they can copy me all they want. I take it as a compliment, but I'd rather have somebody forge their own way and do their own creative thing. And that's, I think, exactly what you're doing. You've had a lot of influences, Jim Henson, Frank Oz, Chuck Jones, all these people. But when people see your work, they're like, that's Joey Marsocci.
And that's a compliment. Thank you. I think that is what's propelled me, like as a business person, to be able to create the things that I create and not be copied. Like, yes, copy is a form of flattery and all that bullshit, whatever, but genuinely people can't copy what I do because I'm constantly, my brain is constantly evolving even what I do to not copy myself. That comes from Mark Davis, actually. When the day we sat in his house and we were just like, I was just riveted to everything he was talking about. It was wonderful. But he said something that day in his rants, because he would go on rants and you had to prepare yourself for, what am I going to hear him rant about now? Like, do I agree? Do I not agree? But whatever, I'm sitting in Mark Davis's house. And here was the thing. Mark Davis is known for what he's done for Disney. That's what he did his entire life. That people knew. Like if you like that shit, you know who Mark Davis is. However, Mark Davis, his actual art style, like he's traveled the world. His art style is not what we see in Disney cartoons. So we step up to this tiny little bungalow in Burbank that exposes, it's like a TARDIS, and it just opens up into this giant house into the Hollywood Hill. And it's filled with his artwork, but I don't know it's his artwork. His artwork is all over his house from his world travels, things he's sculpted, things he's like, and I'm like, oh shit, like I don't know Mark Davis. I know Disney's version of Mark Davis, right? His concept of designs that are influenced through his travels throughout the world and understanding those cultures, that is Mark Davis. And what was interesting is he sat down and he's doing this rant, and I'm like preparing myself. And he's like, you know what's wrong with the school you go to? That's how he started it. And I was like, what, Mark? He's like, they're teaching you how to animate like me. They should be teaching you about art history. Because I learned how to animate, I learned how to design by learning from the masters who did it first. So in essence, when they teach you how to draw like Disney animators, you're learning a watered down version of what I've learned. And when he said that, I was like, fuck, you're right. Like that, yeah, that's exactly what they're doing, right? You're learning to write, you're learning to draw, you're learning whatever you're learning from that version of, you know, oh, I love Kevin Smith's work, I'm going to write like that. No, you have to write from his, like, how did Kevin Smith even come up with that shit, right? Who were his influences? So when I was thrown into teaching music and teaching kids to understand who are the influences of the artists that you listen to what they listen to, and then go back and listen to what they listen to, and then you'll find what you like. Yeah. That concept of understanding where things come from to know where you're going was something that my sister inadvertently taught me as a kid. Like, she said that to me. She wrote it in a journal she gave me. She said, if you want to know where you're going, and she probably quoted it from somewhere, I don't know. But she said that. She's like, if you want to know where you're going, you need to know where you've been. And I never understood it till Mark Davis sat down and said it. Because then I looked around at everyone in our school and I was like, oh yeah, they're teaching us how to draw like Ren and Stimpy. Yeah. That is the animation style that we are all learning, which is squash and stretch animation that was built for by Bob Clampett to do, not Bob Clampett. Who did Ren and Stimpy? Now I'm forgetting. Was it Bob Clampett? No, it wasn't.
I'm not sure what his name was. I just know Billy West does the voice.
Right, he did the voice. But the person who created Ren and Stimpy was very popular when we got into school. So they were teaching his animation style because, well, that's what people want to see.
Did you ever hear the story of him?
Mindset.
I was going to say really quick, did you hear the story about him, how he got kicked off his own show? Yeah. He could, and then they asked Billy West to take over for both voices. Because I met Billy West, and I think that he is the Mel Blanc of the 21st century. I think that he's very, very talented. And I was talking to him for a while because he was affiliated with the Howard Stern show. And we were laughing how Howard was so just stressed out that like Billy could care less. He goes, I don't really care. I don't need his money. He thought he had control over me. He goes, I just did that for fun. And so we were talking about all the different voices he's done. But anyway, we were talking about, I can't remember his name from Ren and Stimpy, but we were talking about that too. And he said he felt so bad because he goes, I really didn't know what was going on. I was asked to do it. It's a job. What do you want me to do? And I said, I don't blame you.
Right. Well, and at the time back then, it was like, that was like, yeah, I mean, that was going on all over the place. I mean, that's how I was able to like kind of dabble into voiceover work, because it was like, all right, I wasn't a SAG actor, so I could do voices for like pilot shows and get paid for them, but not get credit, you know, and you're starving as a college student, so why not? You know, take the money. But I was so influenced by those people, and you're absolutely right. Like Billy West is amazing. You know, the fact that like Futurama, right? This whole thing that happened with Futurama coming back, and the fact that they couldn't get Bender to come, or the voice of Bender to come back, immediately went across the internet. And I knew it was going to happen. I knew as soon as it was like, Futurama's coming back. Yay. Oh, Bender's not going to be back. Whoa. Then I don't know if I want to watch that. Not to any disrespect to anyone else on the show, but then him standing up and saying, we deserve more for what we do. Like, you do, they do, you know, and stating that until they understood it. And, you know, that's an important thing. I think standing up for the things that you know are right, even when everybody else, like even to the, like, you're gonna lose money on it. All right, but I'm still gonna say what I need to say. I'm still gonna, and move on those, and act on those thoughts. Those are the people that inspire me when I see that. I'm like, yep, then you did the right thing. Like, because the internet clearly was angry.
Oh yeah, I remember that well.
Right? So, and it didn't take long. It did not take long for them to like, oh shit, we made a mistake. Yeah, you did. What the fuck are you thinking? You can't have Futurama without Bender. Well, that's it. Case closed. So, you know, I think those people are important. Like, again, it just comes down to like those people in the industry that give you the, like, they care about what they do. Like, it's a craft to them. It's an art. And most people don't see that. I think the nerdy people like us who grew up on that shit, like, yeah, we immediately tie into like all the little details of how did that happen? How did you make that happen? That's what was so fun about listening to you and John do the movie
Real talk
podcast. Yeah, I love that, because I love sitting around talking about that shit. And whether that's my autism and just hyper focusing, like, I love that. I love sitting around and doing that. You know, you and I talked about Mystery Science Theater before. The fact that that exists for people like you and I, that were like, we were doing that in our basements, like just like with our friends, but that's an art form. Like, that is hard to do, right? I mean, it's smart. It's just smart comedy, and you either get it or you don't. You know, it may be low lying fruit, but what the fuck, you got to eat, right? So I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent there. So
I want to go on with that, because as we talked about Mystery Science Theater, and that sort of grew into Riff Tracks, which now they have both, and three of the guys from Mystery Science now do Riff Tracks. And I think, to me, that's even funnier, and it may be low-hanging fruit, but every time they have the live show, which is taking place in Tennessee, they have it live streaming in the theaters. The theaters are always packed. There's definitely an audience for it, and everybody's laughing. And like you said, it's not just, they put a lot of work into it. It may look like, the genius of them is they make it look like it's so easy. And that's what's so great about it, because I'm sure it's hours, days, months of getting the jokes exactly how they want it. And then they just go off and they start riffing, and it sounds like you and I just talking right now. So yeah, maybe low-hanging fruit, but I think that there is a place for it in the art world. And I'm so glad that they do it, because it's like you said, I still do it now. I'll be watching a movie and I'm just going off, just making joke after joke after joke. And it's now,
And that's what truly makes it entertaining. That's what made Sharknado watchable, right? I saw the Riff Tracks version of that in a theater after I had already sat through Sharknado. And I tell you, I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this, but we went and it was brilliant. Like it was brilliant. And the timing of that, like just their timing, because they are rehearsing it, they are reading it all, and they are planning it, but it feels natural. It feels like you were sitting there with your friends making fun of this shitty movie, and it now has made the movie better. So to say that about Sharknado, like I won't watch Sharknado, but I will watch the Riff Tracks version of Sharknado because it is brilliant.
well, no, me too. And the problem I have with Sharknado is a cult movie doesn't try to be a cult movie. It just happens. And one example is The Room. That Sharknado tried to be a cult movie. It was made to be a cult movie, and the only time I'll watch it, like you said, was when Riff Tracks does, because the movie itself is just so bad, and you could tell they're trying too hard. When you have like a classic movie that is really bad, but they think it's good.
Right.
Like
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love B movies. I mean, I grew up on B movies. I purposely would seek out the creature double feature and watch like the shitty monster movies because they were bad, right? But I mean, then to have a budget and make it bad on purpose, like that's a different thing. That's not what the guys from South Park do either. Like they're just on their own doing their thing, and it's like, no, this is entertaining to us, and we're going to do it. You know, it's like we were saying before. Like, when do you just not give a shit what other people are going to think, and just make the thing that you love, right? Because it entertains you, even just for that. And I think there is a severe lack of that, which, like I said, the more recent example with Netflix, who just is going to, we'll just keep making Joe Tiger movies and whatever, but we won't renew what took 40 years to make with the Dark Crystal. Like that, sitting down with I got to sit down at a table and talk to the writers and producers of that show, of the Dark Crystal, at the Museum of Moving Images in New York. They did a talk. Cheryl Henson was there. Some of the writers were there. The producer was there. And just talking about that, right? Just talking about the quality of it took so long to do this. And yeah, it was expensive, but it's like, I could wait another 40 years to find out. I already know, what happens because I read the comics, but it's like, that stuff is so far in between now. And we're just being bombarded with immediate, non-thinkable things. And I can't wrap my head around that because I don't create that way.
The problem is this goes back to the 80s, probably even before, but the example in the 80s is there was a show called Police Squad. Leslie Nielsen became Naked Gun, the movie. The show only lasted maybe a season and a half, and they said was because people actually had to pay attention to the show. There was so much details, everything going on in the background, all the joke after joke after joke. And they said people don't really want to have to sit there and watch TV. They just want to be entertained, which is really sad. And now with everything being thrown at us left and right from social media, all this, we become such an ADHD nation. People don't want to sit through great things like the Dark Crystal, for example, or other shows. They'd rather just sit there in front of the TV and just become comatose as they're eating their burger, their popcorn, and say, all right, I'm tired, I want to go to bed. They're not even paying attention to what's on the TV. So that's the problem. That's why they don't even want, and like you said, the biggest thing is that it's so cheap and it makes money. So who really cares about, unfortunately, the quality is being thrown out the window for the money.
I mean, you've still got, I think that's the point though, is that there's still those people who realize that and don't care. They will still keep making those things that are Peter Jackson putting so much detail into Lord of the Rings that nobody is going to see, but he knows is there. You still got Guillermo del Toro. I watched Nightmare Alley again the other night, right?
Yes.
And I'm mesmerized by the scene in the sinner's tent in that haunted house. That he built that, like from the outside, it looks like a normal carny, like, you know, dark ride. And then when you walk in, like you're only in there for 5 minutes in that scene. They never go back to it. And I'm like, why aren't we back in that tent? Like, why haven't we gone back to the whole, like, and I had to like stop focusing on that because I just wanted to go back in there and see all those details, right? Hellboy 2, same thing with the Goblin Market. The Goblin Market is filled with so many, like if you watch the making of it, incredible. Like the stuff that's in there that's like, even he is walking through and he's like, oh yeah, this alley just continues down around the corner, and he picks up a little bench with shoes on it that's around the corner that you never saw. But somebody had to make it, and he paid them to make it because that was his vision. It had to be there. So it's like those people, like those are the people that are like, yeah, we need more people like that, you know.
Another
the Dark
example,
Crystal. Yeah.
I was gonna say really quick. Another example would be the Quentin Tarantino's last movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He said he recreated the '60s so extensively that there's so many things in there that they're just driving. Brad Pitt's driving by, nobody pays attention to, but they said his attention to detail was immaculate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, but I mean, that's the thing. Like our life experiences, that's where it comes down to. I think with all these people that I admire, their life experiences are what's fueling their art, and that's what, you know, that's what it comes down to, right? I mean, even Kevin Smith. I mean, Kevin Smith now, having gone through the trauma he went through a few years ago, is not the same trauma. It is not the same Kevin Smith that was before that. And he didn't have to go through a trauma. He simply was trying to, I'm not going to, you know, I don't need to spend my money on college. I'm not going to do what people are telling me to do. I've got all these ideas and I want to make them. That's great. That is a good way to live, you know? And then he almost dies. And now we've got a new Kevin Smith who has that same old Kevin Smith in him, but now he's totally different. And that totally different Kevin Smith is even more knowledgeable and more filled with helping people live their dreams, right? Because that's what he's good at. So he's using that talent in a different way too. And I think that's pretty amazing. So, but it's coming down to, you know, Guillermo del Toro, when I was doing research on him and realizing that he lived in this hyper religious family where, and I'm not even gonna try to attempt but the people who would self-harm when they sinned, like that was what he grew up in. The fact that he was being abused by his parents for believing in monsters and fairies, yet he continued to do it. And not only continued to do it, but then put it out there for the world to fucking see. That's amazing. That is amazing because that is the world that he lives in. And that is why every story that he's telling is that these imaginary creatures are the ones who have more feeling sometimes than the monsters we live with that are human. That is the reality. That is a very real place to be in with trauma. And he tells that story again and again and again. Tim Burton, I'm going to say, his stories are about him, right? His stories are about not fitting in, being bullied, being different, but feeling beautiful inside and not knowing how to express it in any other way. That is Edward Scissorhands. That is Jack Skellington. That is Big Fish. That is, you know, like that was what he's trying to say. When he came and went to Cal Arts and did a lecture, and he said, he was talking about Edward Scissorhands. Now, Cal Arts, the building, is in Valencia, California. It sits on a hill surrounded by a suburban world, right? So Edward Scissorhands, the castle where Edward lives, is a fucked up, creepy looking place surrounded by a suburban village. And those people think that there are monsters that live up in that house. They don't understand it. So they're afraid of it. He was basically saying, we are artists. They don't understand us. We are the monsters to them. And he replicated it. And that's all it is. That's all, like, that whole like design of that was like, oh, that's simple, but it's brilliant. That's CalArts. That's what people think of us from down below in their perfect color pastel houses and driving their very similar Toyota Corollas to work every day. That is what we are. And having that realization of being able to pull that bullying, that trauma of not being accepted, and then make it into your career, that's telling your story. And nobody would know that. Nobody would look at like those things if you know, some people just, they watch Nightmare Before Christmas and it's, you know, it's a kid's film.
Yeah,
It's not a kid's film at all. You know, Jack Skellington is depressed. He does not want to do what he is forced to do because he has lost who he is. And he wants to be beautiful, but he can't. He doesn't know how to, and he doesn't know anybody around him who can. And then suddenly he fucking sees it. And he becomes obsessed with trying to change, but he doesn't know how to do it. Like this, that's life. That's like, that is a very real place to be in as an adult, where it's like, I want to be in a better job. I want to be in a better relationship. I don't know how to. So I'm just going to suffer. And then everybody's going to enable me to suffer too. So you're going to stick around that, or you're going to try, you know what I mean? Like that's the power of the statement within Nightmare Before Christmas. That's why I love that movie, because it's like, oh, that's much more adult than we're thinking. And luckily we have these movies coming out that Pixar makes that are like, I have to see my therapist 2 or 3 times from watching a Pixar movie, right? Fucking Up. Are you serious? That movie destroyed me in 10 minutes. And my kid looks at me and he's like, why are you crying? And I'm like, I don't even know how to process what I just saw. And as an adult, to then be able to sit in a kid's movie and feel that, like that's some powerful shit. That means that we have artists that are finally, I mean, fuck, look at like just the past 2 years. If you look at what Marvel Universe has created on Disney Plus, right? Outside of the other movies, we have had 3 movies that very realistically deal with grief, trauma, therapy. Like that's what their movie, that's what Loki, WandaVision, right? And Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Those 3 shows are all about grief, trauma, how to deal with it to an adult nerdy audience. It's brilliant. I mean, Loki fucking breaking down to see, like, understanding who he is and what he's pretending to be because he finally has reached that point. I think being able to like see that, I mean, for me, I don't know, The Good Place, Michael Schur's The Good Place TV show fucking changed everything for me as far as watching anything. The show is brilliant. Like, I love his work in general. I love The Office. I love like the little messages behind it. But The Good Place was like something that resonated with me. That was like, this is deep.
Is
And
The
then
Good
all
Place
of
the
those
one with
shows-
Ted Danson?
Yes.
Yeah. And he's sort of like in they think they're in heaven, but they're really in hell, or vice versa. I watched some of the first season and I did like it. Yeah. So it's a good show.
If you know, that's the thing with that show. So we should have said spoilers before that. John put spoilers right before he says that, because that show, like, I mean, I'm one of those people that's like picking apart what's going on, trying to figure out and get ahead of it. And that show, like, it gets to the end of the last episode of that season when you realize what the fuck is going on.
Yeah.
And that they already threw a twist at you to totally misdirect you. And then they got to this and it's like, whoa, I did not see that coming. But more so, they were like carte blanche, just here you go. I'm going to give you 4 seasons. Go make whatever you want, Michael Schur. And he went away and made a show somehow making ethics and morals fun. And that show, like that show should be like, you have to watch that in high school. Like, I feel like that show like did something that it was like taking, you know, the themes of how to be a better person, but why to be a better person. It's got so many different emotions. And I think that's what it, like, for me, that's what it comes down to. It's like watching WandaVision and getting to a line so simple. You know, the show's about grief. The show is, that's what they're showing you in this hyper wonderful cinematic universe, to get to the line of what is grief if not love persevering? And I, as someone who has lost so many people in my life, have never thought of that in that simplest form. And I was just blown away. I was just like, what the, that fucking came out of a Marvel show? Are you kidding me? Like, how did that happen? You know, at the end of The Good Place, the last season, and again, no spoilers, but they say something, they describe grief as a wave in the ocean. And I'm not going to go into it because I'm not going to do it justice, but it's like, it became so profound. Like, all of a sudden it was just like, it made me change how I lived. Like, this show, this TV show made me change how I live, how I react, how I act, how I, like, all these different things. So it's like all the things we've been talking about. It makes you who you are. But there's so many good things out there that then The Good Place went on to make a Good Place podcast. And then I listened to that. And it was with Mark Evan Jackson talking to the artists who made all this detailed shit that you have no idea that's going on in the background, which made the show even better. But the wonderful thing about the show is that at the end of the show, he'd ask whoever was on the show, he's like, tell me something good. What's good? That's how he ended his podcast. And they would tell him whatever they thought was good in the moment. It could be something tiny. It could be something that happened in their day. It could be something monumental. And then he expanded it into this show of all the fans of the show writing to him to tell him what's good. And during the pandemic, made a 3-hour podcast of just people talking about what was good. And it was such an uplifting thing to hear. And that was where, when I said that worry is a good thing because it makes you realize that you feel, that you care, I got that from that, because some woman wrote in that was a college student that was like, that's what's good. Worry is good because it means that you care. And if you let it change you into fear, that's when it's not good. Because I would have never thought that there was anything good about worry.
Yeah.
But
that's what I like about you. And I said this throughout the show, that you take the worst things in your life and make something good out of it. Something good happens from it. And I want to talk about that because what you just said about that podcast is a good segue for what I'm talking about. You mentioned it before. Little changes each day will make one big change. And there's 3 things that you did. You assigned yourself 3 tests. And what were they? So you could make yourself a better person. You had to do 3 things each day.
This was, I don't honestly know where I got it. I'm going to say that right off. But what I ended up doing, and this was after the surgery and almost dying and coming back, or whatever, however you want to say it. I started to do something. I realized, I guess where it came from is that I had a few therapists that were not great for me. They may have been great for other people. They did not work for me. You're constantly being told, if you believe you can do it, you can do it. Now, there is some truth to that, but I, being a very literal person, have to look at things differently all the time. And so my brain constantly goes to that thought of like, look, if you tell me that I believe I can fly, I can't fly. Like, there's just no way around it. Like, if you really I had to find out a way to change my life so I didn't die again, right? So I had to like physically transform the way that I have now thought for 24 or 25 years. I had to stop all that shit and try to figure out, all right, what am I doing wrong? So I came up with a plan because I felt like, you know, everything, somebody had, I don't know who it is. I'm not going to even pretend to know who said it, but it's like everything that you enjoy, everything that you love is at the other side of fear, right? You were afraid to whatever, drive, you were afraid to whatever, and then you did it, and then you weren't afraid of it anymore. There's a power to that. And the power to that in thinking about how do I get there? How do I get to the other side of fear? So what I did is I had a journal, and in the journal every day, there were 3 spots on each page. So every day I had to write down, I had to get up and I had to write down, I'm going to do 3 things today. Out of my day, I've got 3 things that I want to accomplish. Do one thing that makes me smile. Do one thing that I'm afraid of doing, and do one thing that I didn't do the day before. Now I could, if I accomplished those tasks, I write them down. What did I do underneath it? If I didn't get to all 3, I didn't get to all 3. I just came up with something new the next day, right? There was no like judgment on myself that, oh, there was at first. There was like, I didn't get to all 3 today. That's not the point. The point is get to it or don't. And if you don't, then try the next day. But eventually you'll do it. Now, the things don't have to be huge at all. And that's the point. You have to do something small. You have to do just something that seems minuscule. And that is a way to make it easier, but it's all that's how the change happens, right? So if you go with me on this, so I complete a day. I maybe did one thing or I did all 3. And the next day I wrote it down and I did that and I checked them off and I was checking them off. It's different from a journal because this goes back to something else that I'll talk about in a second, which is a world map of your brain. This stemmed from that. And I just realized that that's where that stemmed from, because I completely kind of evolved past it. But the bigger picture is, if you don't see that you're changing as a person, then you don't believe you're changing as a person. Like then you're not changing. Like that's the thing. So in this little book, I literally could flip through and see every little change led to a bigger commitment without me ever knowing I was doing it. The things that I would do that I was afraid of the day before, I would then continue doing. So they did not end up in the book because there was something different than I did the day before. It was a journal of growth. That's what I made. So I could now see that all these tiny little minuscule changes, which again could be, I'm going to walk a different way than I usually do to go here. It could be, I'm going to say something to someone I've never said to something to that person before. Complete stranger, compliment a stranger, whatever. Those little things add up to being a bigger thing that then evolves into a change that you have now physically made without knowing that you did it, because you can physically see it. I had to be that person that was like, oh, I have to see the physical change. Well, now I have proof. I have proof that I did something different every day, that I did something that I was afraid of, that I did something different. And now I'm on the other side of it looking at, oh, that wasn't, none of that's scary. None of that's, you can see it, you can feel it. And so that is why I started doing that and figuring out that if other people could do that, if they could just see the little changes they were making, they might believe in themselves enough to realize, oh, this makes a much bigger change. I'm a different person than when I started this book than I am who I am right now. And here's the proof.
I think that's a great thing to do, because so many people, I think, want to change drastically and immediately, and then they become discouraged when it doesn't happen. An example would be going to the gym.
Right.
Instead of like saying, I want to lose 100 pounds in a month, say in 1 month, I want to lose 10 pounds, 15 pounds. Then once you do that, say, all right, next month I want to, so it's the same thing with that. Small things. And it's funny because there's so many parallels between me and you, as we talked about before. And besides me doing Blues Brothers, Grinch, Beetlejuice, I do motivational talks. And I always say that. I said, jump out of your comfort zone. So many people, when you ask them, like, oh, so what's new? Nothing. And they just rather settle because they're afraid to try anything new because it's the unknown. I said, try something that you're afraid of. Tomorrow or a day after, you're going to feel comfortable with that the more times you do it. And then, you know what, when you're comfortable with that, try something different. So I say this, I recommend doing the same thing to people. And I've always done that. Whenever one of my biggest things is I never say no. And I don't care if I'm not afraid of failure. I don't really care. I think there's that Michael Jordan quote where it's like, I missed this many shots. I lost 12 rebounds. I had 18 times to get the game-winning shot. I missed it. I failed over and over and over again. And that's why I succeed. And I think that's a perfect way of doing it. Small things like just a compliment to a stranger or just helping somebody with this. And then over time, without even realizing it, like, oh, wow, I'm not afraid of this anymore. And I did make a major change without realizing it.
Right. And I think because we live in this world where instant gratification is something that happens more and more every day, like we're all attached to our phone, right? That's instant gratification, like over and over and over and over. We can watch whatever we want. We can look at whatever we want. We can say whatever we want, no matter the consequences. And, I think if you're going to be on a personal journey, the one thing that I tell people all the time is to be patient with themselves, because I never was, because I wasn't brought up that way, and no one was patient with me. So anytime and it's taken years, but it's like I still hear those voices in my head that degrade me, that yell at me in my head, and then sometimes I do it out loud, and then I have to physically stop, and I'm like, it's not you, that's not you. You're not stupid. You're not stupid. Like, I don't know how, that's one of those things I still work on. Like, I still do it, but it's because I'm not patient with myself. And it's because I then have to remind myself that I have changed, that I'm not that person anymore. There was, I talked before about, when you have that choice, right? The problem, you have that choice of like, this is what I grew up in, and I'm either going to follow that path and be destructive, or I'm going to do the opposite, go the other way. Yeah. And for me, it was like, I looked at it like a slide bar, and it was like, I'm going to put myself way at the other end of the person I don't want to be, like the polar opposite of that person. And I basically just, this is what Dr. Grymm taught me. Like, I never stood up for myself. I never even crossed past that far point, because I felt like if I got anywhere near the center line of that slide bar, I risk becoming like that person I don't want to be. When in reality, what I learned years later was that there's no chance of me being that person, of becoming that person, because it's not in my character to do so. And the fact that I'm scared of becoming that means that I can move up this slide rule and stand up for myself without jeopardizing the character that I am. And that's where you, as a person, need to find that change, because if you're letting your life be ruled by other people who are making bad choices and don't have patience for you, and you just live in that, never get out of it, you find yourself at the end of your life, whether you want to or not, with regret. And I
always say most people live the life they think that are expected of them, meaning that like, oh, I'm a certain age, I'm too old for that. And I always say, why? As long as you're not neglecting your responsibilities and you're still having fun, why do you have to, at a certain age, just stop doing something you love basically like, oh, after 40, I have to stop living. Oh, my whole life's going to revolve around just going to work or waking up, having breakfast, going to work, going home, watching TV, going to bed, getting, basically the same thing over and over again because they think like that's what an adult does. Like you could still have a life, you could still have fun. And unfortunately, so many people will die, as like you said, regretting all things they wish they did do, but they're so worried about what everybody else, and most of the people are worried about their own life. They could care less what you're doing. And if most people realize that, they would be much happier, much less stressed, and have a hell of a lot more fun.
Yeah. Well, and I think, to go back to the media thing, I think that's what's smart about what shows like The Good Place, like WandaVision, like all these shows are like really putting it in your face that you need to take care of yourself. Like you are not taking care of yourself. Like you don't understand this, and that's okay. But here's a way to look at it. Here's a way to talk to someone. Go to therapy. Like just like there's people who, it's like, I don't want to say there's just narcissists and empaths because there isn't. That's two sides of a coin. But there are certainly people that spend their life taking care of other people and don't take care of themselves. And whether that's because of worth or time or money or patience, like it doesn't matter. It's happening. And when you realize it, and if, for what you just said, I feel like it should be the opposite. You should get to like 40 and say, okay, I've paid my dues, and now I'm going to take care of me. Now I'm not in a selfish way, in a survival way, because some people don't know the difference between that. Like I think good people, genuinely caring, empathetic people confuse that line of, they think if they take care of themselves, if they do things for themselves, it's considered selfish. Because just like with me, that's what I thought. I thought if I did anything for myself, it was selfish, and selfish is the road to becoming the shitty person I didn't want to be. And so I wouldn't do anything for myself. Like that's it. No, I can't do that. But that's what I mean by saying you can't, you physically can't. If you are a good and genuine person who is taking care of people, and you don't take care of yourself once in a while, you're not going to be around to take care of people anymore. I learned that the hard way. And I have lost person after person after person, whether it be to sickness, natural disaster, ailment, whatever. You do not want to be to that point, and even myself, you do not want to be to that place where either something is trying to end your life or you are, and be at a place where you have not given yourself a chance. I was lucky to come out of the other side of unaliving myself purely by accident. And it was an epiphany hit me because of what was on the TV at the time that I wasn't paying attention to, and I heard 1,000 times, but I was listening to it as I came out of the blackout I was in. And it was Rango. Rango was on in the background, and Rango was talking to the spirit of the West, and the spirit of the West said, no man can walk out on his own story. And I had heard that line 1,000 times, but that day, in the circumstances I was in, I heard it differently.
Yeah.
I realized what he was saying, and I realized that, it's like if you've seen Rango, again, very adult animated cartoon, not a cartoon for kids. Like there is therapy in that. And for Rango's like, I'm not a hero. You are, you can be. To them, you're a hero. Yeah. So go be a hero. And it's like stuff like that, like, again, if you're not doing these things that are, helping yourself so that you can help others, out of your own, what you perceive to be selfishness, I think that's where putting those little changes, that's why I did it. Because I knew, I had to see change. I had to see physical change to believe it. And where I was going with that, and I'm not going to extend on it too much, but one day a good friend of mine, like I was going through personal stuff, and as you do, and they sat me down at their kitchen table and they rolled out a big thing of butcher paper, and they gave me markers and crayons and pencils and pens, and they drew a little circle in the center of this 6-foot page, and they drew a little stick figure and circled it and said, "This is Joey. And now you're gonna branch off." This took 6 days. The explanation will not. My friend said, take 3 colors that mean, one means negative, one means positive, one means fixable. Take those 3 colors. Now, from your little circle, draw out your problems, your things that affect you, your things in your life, your job, your relationships, and just keep branching that off. So it becomes like a web of your life. So it's like you draw way over here and it's like, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. Now, what the point of the colors is that as you're doing it, so you could go over here and say, family is an issue. Well, why is it an issue? What can I fix? What isn't fixable? What's good, what's bad, what's fixable, and color them, circle them with the color. That was which ironically, not seeing color, it was the feeling of it. Because after 6 days of working on this, I filled the entire butcher paper with every thought in my fucking head of what I thought were obstacles. The point of doing this whole exercise was that when I finally had nothing else to write, I felt a feeling I've never felt before that I don't even have a word for, beyond everything shut the fuck up, which happened with my purge with my empath stuff. But this was a physical, like, oh my God. All of that, when I stepped back and I hung it on the wall, all of this 6 feet by 3 feet paper were filled with tiny little circles of things that were going on in my head in the moment, were suddenly not in my head anymore. They were right there. It's very different from journaling, whereas journaling, you turn a page and you forget.
Yeah.
Unless you go back, you've turned the page, you wrote it down, you turned the page, you're moving on. You ever really go back and read it? And some people do. But in this particular case, to step back and look at a 6 by 3 foot representation of what your brain is doing, but more importantly, realize that what you thought were going to be mostly red circles were green and yellow, because you finally, now that you've laid it out, realize, well, that's not that bad. I can fix that. This will help me fix that because it branched off from here. And it just like connects. It just suddenly all does this like weird, like war zone connection thing. And it's like, oh, I can fix this. That is something I've recommended to people over and over and over, which is a much more complex, like, anguish, like you really have to be dedicated to do that. And some of my friends have, and they come back and they were like, I feel so much better just not having it in my fucking head, that it's there. And now I can look at it and I can add to it or whatever. I think when those people, when you have gone through some shit and you don't take the time or the patience for you, it just keeps going. Like it's still running in the background. It's still fucking with you in the background, and you may not hear it, but it's there. And when you can take that, that's like a reboot. I look at it as a reboot of my soul.
Well, I
So
can
the
honestly
smaller-
say that. I can honestly say that 53 years old, I'm having the most fun. I love my life, and I'm only telling you this is because I agree with you. When you get older, that's when you should sit back and say, you know what, I've done my whole life taking care of this person, doing this, without being selfish. I can still have empathy for others. I can still take care of other people, but concentrating yourself for a little bit. And I love what you're doing with that, what you just mentioned, because it's similar to people who go to a psychiatrist. You only get out of it what you put into it. And I love that you put so much thought, so much focus on everything you're thinking, and you look back on it, like, you know what? That doesn't really bother anymore. It's out of my system. I feel much better about this. So yeah, I think that because you take it so seriously, most people would be like, yeah, I'll get to it. And then they just do it half-assed and you're like, it doesn't work, because they're not really putting the work and time into it like you do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that I think most everybody will get to that point. Where they reach it in their life is totally different. I mean, you and I were talking about that before, like life experience. You could have a great life and like the shittiest thing will happen. You'll spill your coffee on the way to work, and that's the shittiest thing that's happened to you so far. And, you know, it's hard, like we've joked about it before. It's so hard not to be like, you want to hear a story? And you know, it's like I've done that. I don't do it as frequently, but it comes to understanding that, again, those people, they don't have your heart, they don't have your brain, they don't have your experience. So that may be the shittiest thing that happened to them. But I think eventually everyone deals with loss, and eventually everyone's going to deal with their own understanding that they aren't going to be here. When you start to physically, you know, I saw it at a young age. I was blessed and cursed with understanding death at 7 years old. Finding my sister and watching her fall into my arms. You know, that changes you. So if you've had a shitty week at work, like that might lead you down the road eventually to say, oh, I've had another shitty, maybe I just shouldn't be doing this fucking job. Like, and that could be that, like, that's where it's going to go. So I try not to be too judgmental on those people. And I certainly don't go down that I go there in my mind. I don't go there physically often, because then they want to hear my story, and then they need trauma just from hearing my story. So then I have to recommend my therapist, and then he gets extra clients and money. So
And referrals, referral bonus.
Yeah, it's job. I'm job security for my therapist just by the people I tell my story to. But you know it's
what,
not for them.
I want to stick with this subject for a little bit, because I like, you and I were talking about this off the air, and I agree with this, because when something major does happen to you, finally, that's when you realize all these stupid things that you thought were such big problems are nothing. And you realize, I had such a good life. So maybe all the trauma you went through at such an early age made you realize that a little bit earlier than most people. And you realize, I mean, you have other things that you have to work with, which we talked about over the last couple hours, but it made you grow up quicker, but it also made you realize that, like, so many small things, they're nothing. And it made you probably appreciate life a lot more at such an earlier age than most people.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think people yeah, I mean, people who deal with trauma at a young age, that it shapes them in either good or destructive ways, like we said. So it's like, for me, the choices that I've made, the people that I've met, the people I've affected, help me to be a better person. And that's really, like, I think, you know, without, I hate to go back to the good place, but again, it made such an impact on me that the simplest form of, you know, being a good person is just being a little bit better than you were the day before. Like getting rid of the whole heaven and hell and all that, like we are so burdened down that we don't allow, either we don't care that we make mistakes, or we dwell on the mistakes we've made so much that we don't change. And they hold us back like an anchor, and we just become worse and worse. And I think the simplicity of it is that, you know, everybody's a little bit good and everybody's a little bit bad, depending on the moment that they're in, but that doesn't define who they are. So as long as you're a little bit better than you were yesterday, you're okay. So it kind of relieves that pressure, you know, that is frightening about change. because everybody's afraid of change. Like that's the biggest thing. That my doing that 3 list thing was a way to control fear. You are now in control of that thing that you're doing, and being able to see that you can do it is really that's the effect, right? That's the effect down the road. It could be a week, it could be a month. When you go back and you look at it, you know, it's made a difference. You are a different person. And I think when you can see that pattern, and that, you know, like patterns, like I said, I don't know whether it was just my brain loves patterns like it always has. And I don't know whether that's the autistic side of me or not, but whether it be video games or puzzles or whatever, I'm always like, the boss has a pattern in this video game and I know what it is, so I can beat it. Very similar to life. But it was watching High Fidelity. I read the book after I saw the movie. I had no idea the movie existed. I had just gone through a divorce. I have had bad relationship after bad relationship. And I went to my new bachelor apartment and I turned on the TV at like 2 a.m. because I was depressed, and High Fidelity was on. And it was halfway through the movie. But I watched it and I was like, and then I had to go find it. Then I had to watch it again. Then I had to watch it again. Because that movie is about patterns. That movie is about acknowledging patterns in yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, that movie, Rob is a shitty person. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
He's got good intentions sometimes, but he's broken. He's got failures. He knows he's a shitty person. And at the end of the movie, you're left with this open ending of maybe he's not. Maybe he's finally figured out how not to be. But it was by going through and looking at each one of those relationships. And for me, being in bad relationship after bad relationship became looking at the pattern of what I was doing, just like what he did, but not in a selfish way to make myself feel better, but to look at what the fuck happened? Like, what do I keep doing wrong? What do I keep doing wrong? Because that's what the movie taught me. Rob's going out there trying to figure out why they break up with him. Not.
And we lost him. 4 hours into it. Joey, can you still hear me? All right, well, we're going to stop right here. I'm going to get back to him later. That wraps up the latest episode of the Claus Corner. A huge thanks goes up to author, designer, curator, steampunk scientist, owner, and creator Joey Marsocci. I would also like to thank the extremely talented John Bristol of Elmwood Productions for always doing a superb job editing this show and making it available to the public each and every week. And of course, I need to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Now available in one collection. Confessions of a Frenetic Mind. 5 tales of blood-curdling terror. Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim. What's a diaphragm again? Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.